She pressed Imani's hand against the scorching iron and held it there not by accident, not in a moment of rage but slowly, deliberately, with a smile curving her painted lips. That was the moment everything changed. Not the moment Imani screamed, not the moment tears rolled down her face. The moment Sabrina Vale looked her in the eyes while doing it and felt nothing. If that had been your hand, what would you have done? Fought back? Run? Or swallowed the pain the way Imani did, because someone you love needed you to stay quiet? This is the story of a woman who survived being told she didn't belong, and the man who walked in just in time to hear who she really was. Before we go further, if stories about loyalty, power, and justice hit different for you, subscribe right now and hit that bell. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Like this video so more people can find it. Now let's get into it. The burn happened on a Tuesday. That detail matters, though Imani wouldn't understand why for a long time. Tuesdays were the days Vincent Drake held his late business calls from the private study on the second floor. Tuesdays were the days his security detail rotated to their afternoon positions. Tuesdays were the days Sabrina Vale made herself comfortable in the Drake mansion, like she already owned every inch of it, because nobody who could stop her was ever around on Tuesdays. Imani had been working in that kitchen for 11 months. She knew the rhythms of the house, the way you learn to read weather, not by studying it, but by surviving it long enough. She knew which floorboards near the east hallway announced someone coming before they arrived. She knew that Marcus, the head of security, took his lunch break at 12:15 and didn't return until 12:50. She knew that the kitchen's back window, if you left it cracked 2 inches, carried voices from the courtyard clearly enough that you could hear a conversation happening 30 feet away. And she knew that on Tuesdays, when Sabrina showed up unannounced and moved through the first floor like she was already giving a tour of her future home, nobody told her to leave. Nobody except Imani had any reason to. The morning had started ordinary enough. Imani arrived at 6:45, the way she always did, and let herself in through the service entrance with the keycard, mystery, Hartley the estate's house manager had given her during her first week. She set her bag on the hook beside the prep counter, tied her apron, and started the coffee she'd be expected to have ready by 7:30. She liked the early mornings in that kitchen. Before the house woke up, before the security team finished their shift change, before the phone started ringing in the offices upstairs, it was just her and the light coming through the tall windows, and the sound of water running, and the smell of whatever she was about to make. Imani cooked the way some people prayed, completely, without distraction, with her whole body leaning into it. She'd been doing it since she was 9 years old, standing on a step stool in her grandmother's kitchen in Baltimore, learning that food was the one language in that house that said everything nobody had words for. Her grandmother never told Imani she was loved. She showed her by teaching her the exact temperature at which peach preserves thickened just right. She showed her by correcting the way Imani held a knife, not snatching it away, but placing her own hand over Imani's and guiding her. Those lessons stayed. The restaurant dream had been building for years, quietly, the way serious things do. Imani had managed to save a little at every job, not a lot, because she was also sending money to her younger sister Deja every month to help with tuition. Deja was 21, studying nursing at a state university in Maryland, and she was brilliant and stubborn, and scared all the time in the way young people are when they're the first in a family to go somewhere new. Imani called her every Sunday without fail. The Drake position paid better than anything Imani had worked before. When the agency placed her, she'd been hesitant. The name Vincent Drake wasn't unknown to anyone living in New York. You didn't have to move in dangerous circles to hear it. You just had to read a newspaper or live in a neighborhood where the wrong kind of business occasionally announced itself. The money was real, the contract was formal, and the agency had thoroughly vetted the household. Imani took the job because Deja needed 2 more semesters, and Imani's own savings plan required a number she wasn't going to reach otherwise. She told herself it was temporary. That was 11 months ago. She hadn't expected to like the work as much as she did. The kitchen was extraordinary professional equipment, a walk-in refrigerator that was actually organized, natural light that lasted through most of the afternoon. She hadn't expected Mr. Hartley to be decent either, a quiet man in his early 60s who communicated mostly in precise logistical instructions and stayed entirely out of personal territory. And she hadn't expected Vincent Drake to be the way he was. That part had caught her completely off guard. She'd built a picture of him before they met. Hard face, cold eyes, the kind of man who spoke in clipped sentences and expected rooms to rearrange themselves around him. She'd prepared herself for indifference, maybe condescension, the kind of low-grade dismissal that wealthy men sometimes deployed without even realizing it. What she got instead was a man who walked into her kitchen at 7:45 on her third morning, poured himself a coffee he didn't ask permission to take, and then stood there for a long moment looking at what she was preparing. "What is that?" he asked. "Shakshuka," she said. "Eggs poached in spiced tomato. It's on the menu plan," Mr. Hartley approved. He looked at her then, directly, without the particular quality that a lot of men brought to looking at her the inventory, the quiet calculation of her size and whether she fit what they expected. He just looked. "I know what shakshuka is," he said. "I'm asking why it smells like that." Imani blinked. "Like what?" "Like something I want to eat before I go sit in a room full of people I don't like." She almost laughed. She caught it, pressed it down, kept her expression professional. But he saw something cross her face, and the corner of his mouth shifted slightly before he took his coffee and left the kitchen. That was how it started, not with a grand gesture, not with money on a counter or a loaded across a candlelit table, with a man who surprised her not by being charming, but by being unexpectedly, inconveniently human. Over the following weeks, Vincent found small reasons to pass through the kitchen. He didn't linger. He didn't hover. He would come in, ask one question, get an answer, and leave. Questions were real, not flattery, not small talk designed to lead somewhere. He asked her once how long she'd been cooking professionally. He asked another time why she'd chosen Southern food as her specialty when she clearly had range. He asked once, very directly, whether she was happy with the logistics of the or whether there was anything Hartley needed to fix. Imani answered, each time with the careful neutrality she wore at work. Yes, years, because it's honest. Everything is fine, thank you. But she noticed things. She noticed that he remembered what she'd said, that 2 weeks after she'd mentioned, offhandedly, that her grandmother's peach preserves were something she'd never been able to exactly replicate. A jar appeared on the kitchen counter one morning, with a note in Hartley's handwriting that said simply, "From the farmers market on request." No name. But she knew. She noticed that on the evenings she worked late, the security team quietly made sure one of them was visible near the service entrance until she left. She noticed that when Sabrina Vale began appearing more regularly invited, Imani assumed, though she never asked by whom, Vincent's face didn't change in the way it did when he talked to Imani. It stayed the same controlled, unreadable surface he wore in meetings. Sabrina noticed that too, and that was where the problem began. Sabrina Vale was the kind of woman who understood power the way some people understand card games, not by the rules, but by reading everyone else at the table. She came from old money that had been significantly reduced, but never publicly admitted it. Her family had spent years cultivating an alliance with the Drake network, not because they loved Vincent, but because proximity to that kind of influence was itself a form of currency. She was beautiful in a way that required maintenance and strategy. She wore it like armor, every detail of it deliberate. And she was intelligent, not in the way Imani was, quietly, without needing an audience for it, but in the tactical sense. She knew who mattered in a room and how to make herself matter more. What Sabrina had not accounted for was a private chef who didn't perform for anyone. Imani didn't flirt with Vincent, didn't try to catch his eye, or soften her posture when he entered the kitchen, didn't laugh at things that weren't funny, or arrange herself to be noticed. She cooked, answered questions honestly, and went home. And somehow that drove Sabrina absolutely to the edge. The first comment had been light, careful. Sabrina had stopped in the kitchen doorway one afternoon, while Imani was prepping for dinner a Tuesday. The first Tuesday Imani remembered, registering consciously as different, and said, with a smile that was shaped exactly right, "It must be nice to have such a..." She'd paused, tilting her head, comfortable relationship with food. Imani had looked up from her cutting board and held the eye contact. "It is," she said. "Just that." Then looked back down. Sabrina had lingered another moment, then left. Imani told herself it was nothing. The kind of sharpness that bored insecure women sometimes deployed without consequence, because they were never truly challenged on it. She'd encountered versions of it before. She knew how to let it slide past, but it didn't stay light. Over the weeks, the comments built. Always when they were alone. Always with that same careful, plausible deniability smile. About the kitchen being warm work for someone with Imani's build. About how exhausting it must be to stand on her feet all day. Comment about Imani's clothes once the practical, neat, not expensive things she wore under her apron, delivered with the particular false sympathy of a woman who wanted you to know she'd noticed. Imani absorbed them. She absorbed them because the job mattered. Because Dija's last semester started in January. Because the savings account number was finally approaching something real. Because she had learned long ago that swallowing small indignities was sometimes the price you paid for protecting the things you'd built. And because Sabrina, during one of those quiet afternoons when the house was mostly empty, had leaned close enough that Imani could smell her perfume, something expensive and cold, and said quietly, with the smile entirely gone, "I know things about this household that could create problems for people who depend on it. So be smart about how you act in here." It wasn't specific. It didn't have to be. Imani understood the shape of it perfectly. That morning, the Tuesday that changed everything, Sabrina arrived at 10:15. Imani heard her heels on the marble entryway and kept her back to the doorway, finishing the pastry prep she'd started at 8. Sabrina came into the kitchen. She didn't say anything at first. That was worse. The silence was its own kind of pressure, the way a person can communicate threat without opening their mouth, just by the way they position themselves in a room, by the quality of attention they bring to watching you. Imani focused on her hands. The dough was cold. She needed to keep it moving. "He was asking about you last night," Sabrina said finally. Imani didn't look up. "I'm not sure that's something you should be telling me." "No?" The sound in Sabrina's voice shifted. "You think he actually means it? The attention? You honestly believe that?" Imani set down the rolling pin. She made herself be still. "Sabrina," she said, and she kept her voice level, because she learned that level was the one thing Sabrina couldn't use as ammunition. "I'm at work. I'd like to stay that way." Sabrina moved. Imani registered it, the shift in position, the step closer, but she was already turning, already recalculating the distance between them, and it was exactly 1 second too slow. Sabrina had picked up the pressing iron from the prep counter, a heavy tool Imani used to flatten and seal pastry edges, left resting near the stove. It was still hot. Later, Imani would not be able to explain why she didn't move fast enough. Maybe because the rational part of her brain couldn't process, in real time, that a woman in a designer dress in a mansion kitchen was actually going to do what it looked like she was going to do. Maybe because she'd spent so long absorbing without reacting that the reflex had been trained out of her. Sabrina pressed the iron against the back of Imani's right hand. Pain was immediate and total. Imani did not scream. She made a sound sharp, involuntary, the kind that comes before you can stop it, and wrenched her hand back and stumbled against the opposite counter, knocking into the edge of the prep table, catching herself before she went down. Her hand was on fire. She pressed it to her chest without thinking. Sabrina set the iron down. She said, with a calm that was somehow more frightening than rage, "Know your place." The room was absolutely quiet except for the faint sound of something still cooking on the back burner. "If you say anything to him," Sabrina continued, her voice at an almost conversational level, "I will make sure your sister never finishes that degree. I have connections at that university's financial aid office that you haven't thought to be worried about. I have lawyers who don't sleep, and I have patience." She tilted her head slightly. "Do you understand me?" Imani's hand was burning. Her eyes were wet, not crying. Not yet, just the involuntary response of a body registering damage. She looked at Sabrina. She understood her. She understood that the threat was real and specific, and designed to land exactly where it had against the one thing Imani had spent 11 months protecting. She said nothing. Sabrina smoothed her jacket, stepped around Imani's side of the counter without touching her again, and left the kitchen. Imani stood there for a long time. Then she ran cold water over her hand, found a bandage kit in the cabinet under the far counter, wrapped the burn as tightly as she could stand, and went back to work. Because Deja's last semester started in January, and because Imani Brooks had survived worse and quieter rooms than this, and she was not going to let a woman like Sabrina Vale be the reason she didn't. She told herself that. She told herself that right up until the moment. Vincent Drake walked through the door at 3 in the afternoon, 3 hours before he was supposed to be back, looked at her hand, and asked the question that made everything she'd swallowed start rising back up. What happened? She said, kitchen accident. She didn't look at him when she said it. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, okay. And Imani knew from the particular quality of that word, the way it wasn't agreement, but recording, the way his stillness had a different texture than usual, that nothing was actually okay, and that something had already started that she didn't yet know how to stop. Vincent said, okay, the way a man says it when he has already decided something and is simply giving you the courtesy of not announcing it yet. Imani heard the word land in this kitchen air and felt it differently than she should have. Not like reassurance, like the quiet before a door closes on something you can't take back. She kept her back to him and lifted the lid on the pot she'd been tending, checking the reduction by instinct, not because it needed checking, but because her hands needed somewhere to be, and her face needed a direction that wasn't his. I'll have dinner ready by 7, she said. I know you will. He didn't move. She could feel that. The particular weight of a person standing still in a room when they could be leaving it has a texture. It presses. Vincent. She used his name because formality would have been worse. Acknowledged something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. I'm fine. A beat. You said that, he replied. Then his footsteps moved out of the kitchen, unhurried, controlled, and the sound of them disappeared down the east corridor. Imani set the lid back down. She pressed her left hand flat against the counter and breathed through her nose slowly, carefully until the burning in her right hand reduced from screaming to merely constant. Fine, she thought. You said fine. She had been saying fine to the wrong people for so long that the word had worn grooves in her throat. Upstairs she heard his office door close. Not slam. Close. Which was somehow louder. Marcus Reyes had been Vincent Drake's head of security for 6 years. In that time, he had overseen 11 separate security incidents across 3 properties, managed the quiet relocation of 2 individuals whose presence had become problematic, and once coordinated, with 4 hours' notice, the complete evacuation and sanitizing of a building in Newark that nobody ever publicly discussed. He was very good at his job precisely because he understood the difference between what Vincent said and what Vincent meant. When Vincent appeared in the security monitoring room at 4:15, not calling for Marcus, not sending a message through Hartley, but physically appearing, which almost never happened, Marcus understood the difference immediately. Walk me through the interior footage from this morning, Vincent said. Kitchen. From 8 o'clock forward. Marcus pulled the chair. Timeline? All of it. They watched together in silence. Marcus noted which seconds made Vincent's jaw tighten, and which made something behind his eyes go very, very flat. He noted that Vincent did not look away from the monitor when Sabrina appeared in the kitchen doorway at 10:17. He noted that Vincent leaned approximately 1 inch closer to the screen during the portion of footage that had no audio. The room's audio system had a known dead zone near the prep counter area, something that had been flagged in a technical review 6 months ago and not yet corrected. The footage showed Imani's back, Sabrina's face, the iron, the movement. It did not capture sound, but it captured enough. When it was over, Marcus sat very still and waited. Vincent said, "Who else has reviewed this today?" "Nobody. Auto archive system only. Keep it that way." Vincent stood up from the monitor. "Pull audio from the eastern hallway adjacent to the kitchen for the same window, whatever the mic caught from outside the room." Marcus nodded. "Give me 20 minutes." Vincent was already at the door. He paused with one hand on the frame. "And Marcus, how long have you been aware that Miss Vale was visiting the property on Tuesday afternoons?" Question was quiet, completely even. Marcus felt the floor of the conversation shift under him. "She's been on the approved visitor list since March," he said carefully. "Mr. Hartley, I'm not asking about the list. I'm asking whether you noticed a pattern and considered it relevant to report." The silence between them had weight and temperature. "I'll have the audio pulled in 20 minutes, Marcus said. Vincent walked out. Marcus sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desk. Then he picked up his radio and started working. In the kitchen, Imani had nearly finished the dinner prep when Hartley appeared in the doorway. He was a careful man, Hartley the kind, who managed a household like it was a machine he was personally responsible for not breaking. He did not do casual check-ins. When he appeared without logistical purpose, it meant something had shifted in the house's atmosphere, and he was taking its temperature. "Everything on schedule?" he asked. "Roasted lamb, root vegetables. The bread went in at 3:30. She didn't look up. On time. Hartley was quiet for a moment. "Miss Brooks." He had called her Miss Brooks every day for 11 months. "If there is anything you require in terms of—" He paused, selecting words. "Accommodation or adjustment to your working conditions." "I'm fine, Mr. Hartley," she said it gently. Because Hartley was not the enemy, and she could hear the discomfort in his phrasing, the awkward shape of a man trying to say something he didn't have direct orders to say yet. He nodded, once, the way a man nods when he knows the conversation was both necessary and insufficient. Then he left. Imani stared at the bread oven. Someone had talked, or someone had looked at footage, or Vincent Drake was simply the kind of man who noticed things that other people didn't notice and drew conclusions that other people had to be shown. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. Both, she decided, simultaneously, like standing in a doorway with one foot in the rain. Dinner that evening was served in the smaller dining room, Vincent's preference when he wasn't hosting. Imani brought the dishes out herself, the way she always did when the house was at reduced staff in the evenings. She set the lamb, in the center the vegetables alongside, poured the reduction from a small pitcher and stepped back. Vincent sat at the head of the table. He had changed from his afternoon clothes. He looked, she had never found a word, for the way he looked in quieter moments. Not relaxed exactly. More like a machine running at 30% capacity by choice. He looked at the food, then at her hand. She'd rewrapped it with a cleaner bandage. "Sit down," he said. I'm not asking you to eat. I'm asking you to sit." She sat, across the corner of the table from him, not directly opposite that felt too formal, too much like a negotiation. She folded her hands in her lap, the right one, carefully on top, and waited. He didn't say anything immediately. He served himself, which was something he did when he was thinking, kept his hands occupied so his face could stay neutral. "How long?" he asked finally. "How long what?" He looked up. That looked direct, undecorated, the kind that expected you to know better than to deflect. "How long has she been doing this?" Imani's chest tightened. "I don't know what you—" Imani. Just her name, no inflection. But something in it that made the deflection feel like a waste of both their time. She was quiet for a moment. "It started in late spring," she said. "Comments at first. The kind that don't—" She stopped, started again. "The kind that are hard to name as anything specific. Then it got more direct." "More direct," he repeated. "Not a question. Processing." She made it clear she had reach. Family connections. Things she could affect if Imani stopped herself again. Looked at the tablecloth. She mentioned déjà. Something in the room changed. It wasn't Vincent's expression, that stayed even. It was more fundamental than that, a shift in the quality of the air, the way barometric pressure drops before weather arrives. "Your sister," he said. "She's finishing her nursing degree. She's on financial aid." Sabrina implied she knew people at the university who could— Imani exhaled. It was enough. It was enough to make me not say anything. And today, Imani looked at her hand, and today she confirmed. Vincent set his fork down. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular, the middle distance of a man rearranging things in his head. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked. His voice was entirely level. But the question had something underneath it, not accusation. Something closer to frustration, trying to be patient. "Because I work for you," Imani said. "Because I didn't know what coming to you would mean. Because," she pressed her lips together, "because I didn't want to be a problem you solved out of guilt or obligation. Or because it was convenient. Because it's complicated." "It's not complicated," he said. "For you it's not." He looked at her. She looked back. "She works there," Imani said, and her voice had an edge in it now, the kind that comes from exhaustion, finally running out of room to hide. "She moves through this house like it belongs to her. The staff treats her like she has authority here. What exactly was I supposed to do to report an assault by a woman that half this household seems to be waiting for you to marry? The silence that followed was different. Dense. Is that what you think is happening? Vincent said. I think it's what she thinks is happening. And in this house, for the people who work here, what she thinks carries weight. He was very still. I'm not marrying Sabrina Vale, he said. Not emphatically, not with the energy of a man correcting a misunderstanding. With the flatness of stating something that was simply true, the way you'd say it had been raining all week. That's not Imani started. I know it's not what you were asking. He picked his fork back up. I'm saying it anyway. Imani breathed. She was so tired. That was the thing nobody prepared you for. With this kind of sustained tension, how tired it made you. Not just physically, though her hand had kept her from sleeping the night before, even before this morning happened. But tired in the particular way of a person who has been performing composure for months and used up all the material. I need this job, she said quietly. I need it to be clean and uncomplicated, and I need it to last until January, and then I need to be able to leave on my own terms. That's what I need. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. This time the word was different, still measured, but there was something additional in it, a kind of acknowledgement, a respect for the line she'd just drawn. He didn't argue it, didn't soften it with reassurances or flood it with offers. He just heard it, and somehow that was worse, because it made him harder to be angry at, and being angry at him from a safe distance had been a useful organizational system for the last several months. She cleared the table herself at the end of the meal, the way she always did, and told herself she felt better for having said what she'd said. She didn't entirely believe it. That night, after Imani left, Marcus brought Vincent the audio file from the eastern hallway. They listened to it twice. The sound quality was imperfect, partial, filtered through a wall, but the content was not ambiguous. Sabrina's voice was clear enough in the moments where she'd moved closer to the hallway-facing wall. The specific threat regarding Deja's financial aid was partially audible. The phrase that was fully audible, recorded cleanly, no distortion, was 3 words that Sabrina had apparently said loudly enough to carry through the old plaster. Know your place. Vincent listened to it the second time, without changing expression. Then he said, I want to know everyone in this house who was aware of the situation with Ms. Vale and chose not to bring it forward. Marcus said, that's going to be an uncomfortable list. Expect it will be. What are you going to do with it? Vincent stood up. Make sure everyone on it understands what I prioritize. Marcus said nothing. He had learned over 6 years that certain decisions Vincent made were not discussions. They were announcements with a courtesy window before they became final. This was one of those. Sabrina Vale received no call that evening. No message. No indication from anyone inside the Drake network that anything had changed. This was deliberate. Vincent had spent enough years reading situations to understand that the most critical variable in any confrontation was timing. If Sabrina knew she'd been seen, she would prepare. She would construct defenses, emotional, legal, social. She would go to her family. She would deploy the leverage she believed she possessed. She needed to believe everything was normal, at least until it wasn't. 3 days passed. For Imani, those 3 days had a strange underwater quality. Everything's slightly muffled, the texture of ordinary events slightly wrong. She cooked. She completed her hours. She avoided the east side of the mansion where Sabrina had once claimed informal territorial rights, and she tried very hard not to spend too much mental energy wondering what Vincent was doing with what she'd told him. Called Deja on Sunday. You sound weird, Deja said immediately. Deja had always been able to read Imani's voice the way Imani could read a kitchen, by texture and temperature, not by what was being said. I'm tired. You're always tired. This is different tired. A pause. The particular pause of a younger sister deciding whether to push. Is it that job? Is somebody giving you trouble? No, Imani said. Everything is fine, Mani. Deja, I'm handling it. Another pause. Okay, but Deja's okay had the same quality as Vincent's not agreement. Recording. They talked for 40 minutes about Deja's clinical rotation.
About a classmate
she was having trouble with. About a recipe their grandmother used to make that Deja was attempting to reconstruct from memory. By the time they hung up, Imani felt something that wasn't quite better, but was shaped more like herself. She could handle it. She had handled things before. That was what she told herself on Sunday night. On Tuesday morning, Sabrina came back. Imani heard the gate intercom from the kitchen window at 10:40 and felt her body respond, before her mind caught up a particular bracing, a physical tightening across the shoulders and chest, kind of involuntary preparation that happens when a system has learned to anticipate something it doesn't like. She kept cooking. Sabrina's heels on the marble, the particular cadence of them unhurried, proprietary moved through the entryway, paused in the front hall, then came directly toward the kitchen. Imani did not turn around. "You're still here," Sabrina said from the doorway. Not surprised, something else. Reassessing. "I work here," Imani said. She was breaking down a whole chicken with a knife that had been honed that morning, and she kept her eyes on her hands and her movements precise and deliberate. Sabrina moved into the kitchen. Not all the way, she stopped at the island, keeping the counter between them, and leaned one hip against it, with the practiced ease of a woman who had practiced ease for so long it had become real. "You talk to him," Sabrina said. Imani set down the knife. She turned around. This was new. She'd been absorbing, deflecting, sidestepping for months. The thing that happened Tuesday had burned something out of her. Not her restraint, exactly, but her willingness to pretend that restraint was the only option. She looked directly at Sabrina and said yes. The word sat between them. Sabrina's expression moved something behind the practiced surface, shifted, recalibrated. "And what exactly did you tell him?" "Enough. Enough." Sabrina repeated it carefully. The way you repeat something when you're trying to determine its actual weight. "You told a man like Vincent Drake, who has complicated business relationships and family alliances, that people like you don't begin to understand that you had a conflict with his guest. With someone whose family has known his for 15 years. I told him what happened to my hand," Imani said, "and he believed you." He looked at the footage. The air in the kitchen changed. Sabrina's posture changed, not visibly, not in any way that a casual observer would catch. But Imani had been reading people in enclosed spaces her whole life, and she felt the micro-shift the way you feel a draft from a window before you locate which one is open. She had not known about the footage. She thought she had. Now she was recalculating. "There's nothing on that footage," Sabrina said, and her voice had shed one layer of its surface smoothness. "That shows anything other than an accident." "The hallway audio doesn't agree with that," Imani said. She did not actually know this for certain. She knew Marcus had retrieved audio at Vincent's request, and she knew that Vincent's behavior in the days since had shifted in ways that suggested he had found something useful, but she did not know what exactly had been captured. She said it anyway, steadily, holding Sabrina's gaze. Sabrina was quiet for 4 full seconds. That was a long time for Sabrina. "You're making a mistake," she said finally. "You don't know how deep his obligations to my family go. You don't know what alliances you're asking him to damage. This isn't your world, Imani. And when he has to make a choice between you and everything his family has built with mine, you know exactly which way that goes." "Maybe," Imani said, "but that's his choice to make, not yours." Something crossed Sabrina's face that Imani had never seen there before. Not anger, she'd seen anger. Something rawer than that. The particular expression of a person who has just understood that the story they built their entire strategy around might have a different ending than they planned. Then it closed over like ice forming on water. "I told you to know your place," Sabrina said quietly. "You did," Imani said. "I've been thinking about that." She picked the knife back up and turned back to the counter. Her heart was hammering. She could feel it in her throat, in the hand that held the blade, in the bandaged hand she was keeping carefully at her side. But her voice had been steady. Her hands were steady. Behind her, she heard Sabrina straighten from the island. "This isn't over," Sabrina said. "No," Imani agreed. "It's not." She heard Sabrina leave. She stood at the counter for a long moment with the chicken half broken in front of her, the knife in her left hand, and the distinct understanding that she had just done something that could not be undone. She had stopped absorbing. And the moment you stop absorbing, the thing that was pressing against you has nowhere to go but forward. What she did not know, could not have known from inside that kitchen, was that Vincent Drake had returned to the property 40 minutes before Sabrina arrived. That he had done this deliberately, quietly, without announcing it through the house, intercom the way he normally would. That he was standing at the moment Sabrina entered the kitchen in the east corridor, 23 feet from the kitchen doorway. with Marcus positioned at the far end of the hall, that he had heard every word, not through a monitor, not through a recording being processed in some back room. In real time, through a partially open kitchen door, standing in his own hallway with his hands at his sides. He heard Imani say enough. He heard her hold the line on the footage. He heard her say, "That's his choice to make, not yours." And he heard, plainly and unmistakably, Sabrina Vale say to the woman he had already quietly, privately, in the way that serious men make serious decisions, decided mattered to him. Know your place. Marcus looked at him from the far end of the hall. Vincent didn't speak. He didn't move. He waited until Sabrina's footsteps had cleared the kitchen and begun moving toward the front hall. Then he turned to Marcus and said, with the particular quiet of a man who has just found the final piece of information he needed, "Lock the gates." Marcus said, Now, and get me Caruso." Caruso was his legal counsel. "Tell him I need him on property by 4. Marcus radioed without another word. Vincent stood in the corridor for one more moment. Through the kitchen door, he could hear Imani working the methodical sound of the knife, the faint clink of metal on the cutting board, a woman finishing what she started because she had decided that was who she was. He pushed off the wall and walked toward the front of the house. Sabrina was in the entry hall, her back to him, pulling on her coat. She heard his footsteps and turned with the social reflex of someone who had spent a lifetime managing first impressions. The smile she assembled fell apart before it finished forming, because his face told her, in the 1 second before he opened his mouth, that the math she had been running on alliances, on leverage, on the particular power she believed she held, had been based on the wrong numbers from the beginning. "Sabrina," he said, "stay where you are." The gate had already locked behind her. She heard it from where she stood in the entry hall, the electric click of every external access point on the property, engaging simultaneously, a sound most people who visited the Drake estate never heard because it was only triggered under one category of circumstance. Sabrina knew enough about this household to know what that category was. Her face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. And then Vincent said, very quietly, in the voice he used when the conversation was already decided, and he was simply informing the other party of the outcome, "We need to talk about what you've been doing in my house." There was no question in it. No warmth, no anger, no sign of the particular calculation that sometimes mistook for hesitation in a powerful man. Just the weight of someone who had heard everything he needed to hear, and was now, with the gates locked and counsel incoming, and every second of the morning's footage already secured in a format that Caruso would know exactly what to do with, closing the last open door. Sabrina Vale stood in the entry hall of a mansion she had spent years believing she was destined to inherit, and understood for the first time, with the full and terrible clarity of a woman who had misread every important thing, that she had not been managing this situation. She had been walking into ones. Sabrina did not sit down when Vincent gestured toward the chair in the front study. That was the first thing. The small refusal, the instinct of a woman who had spent 30 years understanding that. Sitting when told to sit was a form of yielding, and yielding was the one thing she had never learned to do gracefully. She stood near the window instead, her coat still on, her bag still on her shoulder, and she arranged her face into something that was trying very hard to be composed. Vincent sat. He did this deliberately, choosing the chair behind the desk, the position of domestic authority, the place where conversations were decided rather than had. He did not offer her anything. No water, no courtesy preamble, no acknowledgement of the years her family name had floated through the edges of his world. He simply looked at her and waited. Sabrina spoke first, because silence was a weapon she had never been able to hold as long as he could. "This is unnecessary," she said. Her voice was almost right. The almost was in the slight upward movement of the second syllable, barely there, detectable only if you were specifically listening for what her confidence was hiding underneath. "Whatever she told you, what she told me," Vincent said, "is consistent with footage from the kitchen, audio from the east hallway, and the account of at least 2 members of this household who have now given me statements." The word statements landed in the room. Sabrina's expression processed it in pieces. The footage she had known about, or believed she had. The hallway audio she had learned about too late. Already a mistake, already made. But statements. Plural. Members of the household. "Who?" she said. "That's not something I'm going to tell you." Someone on your staff is lying to you. Someone who wants to create a problem, Sabrina. He said her name the way you cap a bottle. Just enough pressure to stop what was coming out. I've been running operations that involve actual liars for 20 years. Don't try to tell me what lying sounds like in this room. Her jaw tightened. One small movement, quickly controlled. She shifted tactics. Imani had read her right about that Sabrina was intelligent in the tactical sense, and tactical intelligence reroutes when the road closes. She pulled her bag strap higher on her shoulder, which was the physical equivalent of resetting her position, and she said, "My family has a 15-year relationship with yours. Your father and my father built the foundation of 3 separate business arrangements that your current operations still benefit from. You know that. I know you know that. I do know that," Vincent said. "Then you understand that this," she gestured, "a short, precise movement, whatever you think you're doing, has consequences that go beyond the two of us, beyond this house. You'd be damaging relationships that took 15 years to build over a—" She stopped, recalibrated, chose the word she thought was surgical, over a misunderstanding. "A misunderstanding," Vincent repeated. "She's a private chef. She's an employee. Whatever she told you, whatever she believes about what happens. She has a 2nd-degree burn on her right hand," Vincent said, "from a pressing iron that was at temperature, that you held against her skin." The room went very quiet. Outside the study windows, the late afternoon had turned gray, the light flattening toward evening, in the particular way it did. In Manhattan in early winter, the sky not darkening so much as withdrawing. "I want my lawyer," Sabrina said. "Caruso is on his way to this property. He represents me. You're welcome to call whoever you'd like." She pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved across the screen without shaking, and Vincent noted the particular discipline of a woman who had been trained since childhood to keep the shaking internal. He waited while she made the call, keeping her back partially to him, speaking in a low voice he didn't try to hear. When she turned back, she said, "He'll be here in an hour. Then we'll wait." She sat down, not because he had asked her to a second time, because standing for an hour in heels while being watched by a man who had already made his decisions was a different kind of yielding, and she was smart enough to know it. Vincent picked up a folder from the desk and opened it and began reading something inside it that was not about her, making it clear in the way that only truly patient men can make clear that her presence in the room was no longer the most important thing happening in it. Sabrina sat in the chair across from him and stared at the wall and thought. She thought about what had been recorded, about what those statements might actually say, about what the burn looked like on Imani's hand, and whether it had been photographed and documented in a way that would hold up against the accident narrative she'd spent 5 days being certain was sufficient. She thought about her father. That was the thought she kept coming back to, cycling under all the tactical reassessment, her father's face when she'd told him, 3 months ago, that she was making progress with Vincent, that the alliance was closer than it had ever been, that she was handling it. Her father's particular expression of relief and approval, the expression she had been chasing since she was 9 years old, standing in his office, listening to him explain to her older brother, as though she weren't present, how the Vale name would be carried forward. She had been handling it. She had been handling everything. In the kitchen, Imani was finishing the bread. She'd shaped the loaves mechanically, the muscle memory of it carrying her through, while her mind was somewhere else entirely in the entry hall, in the east corridor, in the quality of the silence that had fallen over the mansion since the gates locked. She hadn't heard voices. The study was on the opposite side of the house, far enough that, even in the quiet of a locked-down property, she couldn't catch anything through the walls. She knew Vincent was in there with Sabrina. She knew because Marcus had appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes after Sabrina had left the kitchen, looking at her with the particular expression of a man who had just handed information that changed his understanding of a situation he'd thought he understood. "Mr. Drake asked me to let you know," Marcus said, "that you should feel free to complete your shift normally. He'll have Hartley handle any logistics before end of day." Imani started. "She's on property," Marcus said. "She won't be going anywhere for the next while." Imani looked at him. Marcus had the look of someone carrying more than he was saying, and fully aware that what he was carrying was heavy. He wasn't a bad man. Marcus, she'd understood that from early on. He was a man who had learned to function inside a system that, occasionally, required looking away from things that weren't his assigned territory to look at. Statements, she said. Did someone hear? I can't discuss that with you, he said. But the fact that he didn't say, I don't know what you're talking about, told her something. Someone in the house had come forward. Maybe more than one. Turned back to the bread. Mr. Reyes, she said without turning around. For what it's worth, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're in a hard position. A pause. I appreciate that, Miss Brooks, he said. She heard him leave. The bread needed 12 more minutes. She stood at the oven window and watched the loaves rise, and told herself to stay in the 12 minutes. Don't get ahead of it. Don't start building the version of events where everything resolves cleanly, because clean resolutions had never been Imani's experience of the world, and starting to expect them now was just setting up for a different kind of pain. Stay in the 12 minutes. Sabrina's lawyer arrived at 5:47. His name was Peter Dahl, a man in his late 50s, with the particular coloring of someone who had spent decades in rooms without enough daylight, and the particular suit of someone who billed $400 an hour and wanted you to know it without being crass enough to say it. He and Sabrina conferred in the hallway outside the study for 11 minutes. Vincent did not rush them. He finished the folder, started a second one, checked 2 messages on his phone, and responded to neither. When they returned to the study, Dahl arranged himself in the chair beside Sabrina and opened his briefcase with the practiced ease of a man beginning a familiar kind of performance. Mr. Drake, Dahl said, my client has asked me to convey her willingness to discuss any misunderstandings that may have arisen in. There's no misunderstanding to discuss, Vincent said. He said it simply, the way you correct a factual error. Question is how we proceed from here, which is what I've been waiting to talk about. Dahl recalibrated. Mr. Drake, with respect, without an opportunity to review the evidence you're claiming to possess. Caruso. Vincent didn't raise his voice. He simply said the name, and the door opened from the interior hallway, and his own counsel entered a compact man in his 60s, with steel-gray hair and reading glasses, pushed up on his head, who sat in the remaining chair with the ease of someone who had been through this particular kind of meeting many times, and found it less dramatic than people expected. What followed was 40 minutes that Imani would never be present for and could only later piece together through what people said and didn't say in the aftermath. What she would eventually understand. Caruso laid out the footage documentation, the audio file, the photographic record of Imani's burn that the property's medical contact had been quietly asked to document 2 days prior, and the written accounts from 2 household staff members who had witnessed earlier incidents of Sabrina's behavior toward Imani, and had, once it became clear that Vincent was asking directly, chosen the version of this story that they'd be able to live with. What she would understand. Dahl tried 4 separate angles of counter-argument, and each one was addressed before he'd finished forming it, because Caruso had been preparing for this meeting for 3 days, and Dahl had been preparing for 40 minutes in a hallway. What she would understand, Sabrina, at some point during those 40 minutes, stopped running tactical counter-arguments and went somewhere else, somewhere behind her eyes that was quieter and colder and more truthful than anything she'd said since she arrived. And what Imani would not fully understand until much later, at the 43-minute mark of that meeting, Sabrina did something that nobody in that room expected. She told the truth. Not all of it. Not generously or willingly. But she confirmed, in legal language terms that Dahl tried and failed to soften before they left her mouth, that the contact with the iron had been deliberate, that she had issued threats regarding Imani's sister's financial situation, that this had been going on, in varying forms, since late spring. She said it looking at the desk, not at Vincent. When she was done speaking, the room was quiet. Dahl said, my client's cooperation should be taken into account in any. I'm not a prosecutor, Vincent said. That's not my calculation to make. He looked at Sabrina directly. I'm going to ask you one question, and I want an honest answer. Not for legal purposes. For mine. Dahl started, I advised. It's fine, Sabrina said. Flat drained. Vincent said, why? Not why did you do it? Just why. The single syllable carrying the whole weight of the question, which wasn't really about the iron or the threats, or even Imani specifically. Sabrina was quiet for a long moment. Because you looked at her, she said finally, the way my father looks at my brother. The room absorbed that. Nobody in it said anything for several seconds. Then Vincent said to Caruso, quietly, "Start the filing process." And that was when everything Sabrina had built the story she'd told her father, the access she'd cultivated for 15 years, the alliance she'd positioned herself as essential to started to come apart in the real and concrete way that things come apart when lawyers begin making calls. What happened next did not move slowly. By 7 the next morning, the Vale family attorney had received documentation from Caruso's office outlining the evidence, the nature of the incident, and Vincent Drake's intention to refer the matter to the district attorney's office for criminal consideration. The business relationships between the Drake Holdings and Vale family Ventures' 3 separate agreements, 2 of them in active operation, were placed under immediate review, which, in practical terms, meant frozen pending legal assessment, which, in real-world terms, meant that a revenue stream the Vale family had been, depending on more than they'd publicly acknowledged, was suddenly and without warning unavailable. Imani did not know any of this when she arrived at the mansion at 6:45 that morning, the way she always did. She let herself in through the service entrance, hung her bag on the hook, tied her apron. Hartley was already in the kitchen, which was unusual. He was standing by the window with a coffee he appeared to have made himself, looking out at the courtyard. And when he heard her, he turned around with the expression of a man who had not slept and was trying to look like he had. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "Mr. Hartley." She paused, read him. "What happened?" "Ms. Vale is no longer permitted access to this property," he said, "as of last night. Her visitor credentials have been revoked and her name has been removed from the approved list for all Drake properties." Imani stood with her jacket still half on. "All right," she said. "Mr. Drake has also asked me to inform you that 2 members of staff are no longer in this household's employ as of this morning." Hartley set down his coffee. He seemed to be choosing his next words carefully, the way he always did. But there was something beneath the careful choosing discomfort that wasn't about tact. "I want you to know that I am aware I should have done more. Earlier, he started again. "I am sorry, Miss Brooks. That's inadequate, I understand. But it's true." Imani looked at him. Thomas Hartley was 62 years old. He had been running households at this level for 20 years. He had seen things in various positions of service that he had found ways to not see because the alternative was complications that the position didn't pay him to create. She knew this about him. She had known it for months. She also knew he was telling the truth right now. "Thank you," she said. His shoulders dropped slightly. He nodded, picked up his coffee, and left the kitchen. Imani put her jacket on the hook. She started the coffee. She stood at the counter while it brewed and let herself feel for exactly the length of time it took the first cup to be ready, the specific and complicated relief of a threat that had been removed not by her own hand exactly, not by any decision she'd made, but by a chain of events she had partially set in motion by simply telling the truth to a man who had been paying attention. Then she poured the coffee, set it where it would be expected, and started breakfast. Problem with relief, she was learning, was that it created space. And space had a way of filling with everything you'd been too busy being afraid to think about. Vincent came into the kitchen at 7:40, which was slightly earlier than usual. He poured himself a cup without asking, the way he always did, and stood on the other side of the counter from her, and said nothing for a moment while she worked. "How's your hand?" he asked. "Better. She was using it more this morning. The burn wasn't healed, but she'd rebandaged it properly, and the pain was manageable. What's going to happen to her?" Caruso filed last night. "The DA's office will make their own determination. It's out of my hands now in terms of the criminal piece. And the business piece?" He was quiet for a beat. "Her family's arrangements with my companies are under review. They're going to experience some difficulty there." Imani stopped what she was doing, turned and looked at him. "Vincent, I didn't ask for that. I didn't ask for any of this to my—" "I know you didn't. Her family," he said, calm and even, "has a daughter who burned someone with a hot iron and threatened to destroy her sister's education. Her family is not the injured party in this situation. Imani." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "Then why does it sound like you're apologizing?" She turned back to the counter. "Because collateral damage makes me uncomfortable. Even when the people getting damaged," she stopped, "even when they made choices that led them there." He finished. Yes. He was quiet. Then that's not a flaw. It's not always an asset either. No, he agreed. Not always. She heard him move, the sound of him pulling the stool from under the island and sitting down, which he almost never did in the kitchen. It shifted something about the room, about the quality of his presence in it. He was staying, and both of them knew it wasn't about the coffee. I need to ask you something, he said. She kept her hands moving. Okay. And I need you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is something you think I don't want to hear. She looked over her shoulder at him. That's a long setup. Complicated question. Ask it. He set down his cup. Are you staying because this is the job you need, or because he started differently? If none of this had happened, if last Tuesday had never happened, and the only thing that existed was the last 11 months, would you still be here? The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, the courtyard was silver with early light. Imani thought about 11 months of Tuesday mornings. About a man who remembered what she said and acted on it without announcing he'd done so. About the way he asked questions that were real questions and listened to the answers like they mattered. About the fact that she had gone 11 months in close proximity to Vincent Drake without ever being made to feel like something he was assessing for acquisition. She also thought about the fact that she had spent 11 months telling herself not to think about any of that. That's not a fair question, she said. I know, he said. Answer it anyway. She was quiet for a long moment. Yes, she said finally. Probably. But I don't know what to do with that while I'm still cashing your checks. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it, less pressure, more space. The kind of silence that wasn't waiting for the next difficult thing, but was simply holding what had just been said. Then Vincent said, quietly, That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 11 months. Don't push it, she said. She heard him almost laugh. She'd heard that sound before the near law. The thing he did when something caught him off guard in a direction he didn't mind being caught. It was one of the more disarming things about him, and she'd spent a significant portion of 11 months. Pretend she hadn't noticed it. She kept cooking. He stayed for another 20 minutes, without any particular reason to, asked no more complicated questions, and eventually took his coffee and left. And Imani stood at the counter feeling the specific and terrible clarity of a person who has admitted, in plain language, something they had been successfully lying to themselves about for months. 3 days later, the second collapse happened. It came from a direction nobody inside the Drake household had been watching, because everyone had been watching Sabrina, a journalist named Ryan Cortez, who covered organized crime and financial networks for an investigative outlet that had been building a profile on Vincent Drake's legitimate business interests for several months, published a story. The story was not about the incident with Imani. It was about the Vale family business connection to the Drake holdings and the abrupt freezing of their shared financial arrangements. The story was 4 paragraphs. The 4th paragraph mentioned in general terms a domestic incident at the Drake estate that had resulted in the termination of a business relationship. The domestic incident description was vague. It did not name Imani. It did not provide any identifying detail, but it used the phrase an employee of the household. And it ran on a Tuesday morning, which was when Imani called Dija. She didn't mean to tell her. She had a whole internal architecture built around not worrying Deja before things were resolved, around being the version of herself that Dija could lean on rather than the version that needed leaning back. She'd maintained that architecture through 11 months of Sabrina's campaign, through the burn, through the conversation with Vincent, through the gate locking and the lawyer arriving, and Hartley's apology. But Dija said, 5 minutes into the call, someone from a financial aid office called me yesterday. Imani's hand tightened on the phone. What? Some woman. She said she was reviewing my aid package. She asked about family financial circumstances, whether there had been any changes. Deja paused. Imani, she was weird about it. The questions were weird. Like she was looking for something specific. The breath went out of Imani's chest. When was this? She said. Her voice was doing the thing it did when she needed it to be steady, and it was cooperating, but only just. Yesterday afternoon. Around 3, I called the financial aid office back, and they said nobody from their office had contacted me, that there was no active review on my account. Imani sat down on the step stool she kept near the prep counter. Deja, she said carefully, I need you to tell me everything she said. Everything. Exactly, Deja told her. The call had lasted 7 minutes. The woman had identified herself with a name that the financial aid office confirmed did not correspond to any of their staff. She had asked specific questions about Imani's employment, about the nature of her income, about whether Imani had recently made any statements or reports to any employer, about any incidents in the workplace. Not vague. Specific. Which meant the call had happened after the filing. After everything Imani thought had been resolved. After the gates had locked and the lawyers had been called, and Sabrina had sat in that study and confirmed what she'd done. Someone was still running something. Are you okay? Deja asked. Imani, talk to me. I'm fine, Imani said. The word tasted like nothing. I'm going to take care of this. Don't respond to any calls from numbers you don't recognize. Not about school, not about anything. Call me first. What's going on? I'll explain later, I promise. Just Deja. Trust me. Then okay. But Mani? Yeah. You sound like you haven't slept. I'll call you Sunday, Imani said. I love you. She hung up. She sat on the step stool in the kitchen of the Drake estate with the phone in her hand and understood, with the cold and absolute clarity of a woman whose floor had just dropped out a second time, that Sabrina Vale had not been working alone and had not stopped moving simply because a gate had been locked and a lawyer had been called. Someone else was in this, someone with access to Deja's university account information, with the ability to make a call that looked official, with the specific knowledge of what Imani had reported and when. Someone who was not Sabrina, or someone who was Sabrina, with resources that went deeper than Vincent had accounted for. Imani stood up. She untied her apron. She walked to the east corridor and found Marcus within 30 seconds, because Marcus, since everything had begun, had been keeping himself in positions where he could be found quickly. She said, I need to speak to Vincent right now. Not through Hartley. Not through you right now. Marcus looked at her face. He picked up his radio, and somewhere in the east wing of the mansion, a man who had believed for 3 days the situation was under control was about to learn that the thing he thought he'd closed had only pushed its roots deeper underground, into soil he hadn't yet thought to examine, toward a system that was older and more patient than anything happening between Sabrina Vale and a kitchen pressing iron. The question that Imani carried down that corridor, the question she hadn't yet found words for but could feel in every step, was the one that changes a person permanently once it arrives. Not who else is involved, but how long have I been the last one to understand the room I've been standing in? Imani walked fast and she didn't slow down for anything. East Corridor was longer than it ever felt during ordinary hours when she was carrying dishes or checking the linen closet inventory or simply moving through the house with the practiced invisibility of someone who knew how to exist in a space without occupying it. Now it felt like it went on forever, each step hitting the marble with a sound she could hear in her, and Marcus was 2 steps behind her radioing ahead, with the clipped shorthand of a man who understood urgency without needing it explained. Vincent was in the upstairs study. She took the stairs at a speed she hadn't used in this house before, and didn't stop to think about whether it was appropriate or expected, or within the parameters of her position, because the parameters of her position had been burning down around her for 3 days, and she had just gotten off a phone call that confirmed the fire had spread to the one place she could not let it reach. The study door was open. Vincent was standing at the window with his phone to his ear, and when he turned at the sound of her steps, he read her face in the half-second before she spoke and said, into the phone, simply, I'll call you back. He hung up. Someone called Deja, Imani said. The room was very still. Sit down, he said. I don't want to sit down. He didn't push it. He moved to the desk and stood on the near side of it, which put them in the same quadrant of the room rather than across from each other, and said, tell me everything. She told him, word for word, as close as she could reconstruct from what Deja had described the call, the name that didn't match any actual university staff, the specific questions about Imani's employment, about whether she'd made any workplace reports, about the timing. Vincent listened without interrupting. His face was doing the controlled thing, the surface that didn't move, but his eyes had a quality she'd learned to read, a particular intensity of focus, like something behind them processing at a speed that his expression wasn't keeping up with. When she finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. She counted them. Then he said, "How detailed were the questions?" "Detailed enough to know about the filing. Detailed enough to know what I'd reported, and approximately when. That information is not public." "I know. It would require access to either Caruso's communications, my internal documents, or," he stopped, "or someone inside your network who knew," she said. He turned toward the window. Just his head, not his whole body, the partial pivot of a man adjusting the direction of a thought he didn't want to complete. "The two staff members who gave statements," he said. "I'm not saying it was them. I'm saying it's where the information could have moved from." He turned back. "Who else knew the full details of what was filed and when?" "I don't know your operation, no, but I do." He picked up his phone and made a call. It rang twice, and Marcus picked up. "Bring me Teller and Gaines. Both of them." "Not together." He hung up. Imani looked at him. "Who are Teller and Gaines?" "Two people who've been in this network for a long time." He said it without particular emotion, the way you state the coordinates of something before you go looking at it. "Long enough to have relationships with more than one side of the Vale family's business connections." The implications settled over the room, like temperature dropping. "Someone inside your house," Imani said. "Not for long." Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Teller's in the east wing. Gaines is running the gate rotation. Bring Teller first. Put Gaines somewhere quiet until I'm ready." Marcus disappeared. Imani said, "What can I do?" Vincent looked at her. There were some things in the look that she didn't know what to do with, not protectiveness exactly, not the particular kind of possessive concern that powerful men sometimes deployed as a substitute for respect. Something more specific than that. The look of a man who was about to walk into something hard and was very aware of who was standing next to him. "Stay in this room," he said. "What you're about to hear, I need you to hear it." She didn't ask why. She pulled a chair from the corner and sat in it, and Vincent moved behind the desk, and they waited. Teller arrived 4 minutes later. His name was David Teller, and he was 44 years old, a broad-shouldered man who had been part of the Drake security apparatus for 9 years. He walked into the study with the measured pace of a professional, and when he saw Imani sitting in the corner chair, something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not in any way that a less attentive person would have caught, but it shifted, and Vincent caught it. "Sit down, David," Vincent said. Teller sat across the desk. He put both hands on his knees, which was the posture of a man trying to project calm without understanding how completely he'd already been read. "Call to the university," Vincent said. "The one that went to Imani's sister yesterday, at 3 in the afternoon. Walk me through it." Teller's face went through the work of assembling a denial, and Vincent watched the whole architecture of it go up in real time, the slight pull of the brow, the intake of breath that was going to become, "I don't know what you're talking about," the small forward lean that preceded the performance of confusion. Vincent leaned forward first. "Don't." The single word stopped everything. Teller's hands on his knees pressed harder. A fine tension moved through his shoulders. "I didn't make the call," he said. "No," Vincent said. "But you passed information to someone who did. Whether you understood what they were going to use it for, that's what I'm interested in." The air in the room was very compressed. Imani could feel her own pulse in her bandaged hand, the low steady throb of a burn that had not yet fully healed, and she kept her breathing even and her eyes on Teller, and made herself be very still because the stillness felt necessary, felt like something she owed the gravity of the moment. Teller said, "I've been with this organization for 9 years." "That's true," Vincent said. "I have a kid. I have a situation." He stopped. "The Vales approached me 6 weeks ago. Not Sabrina, her father." He said, he exhaled through his nose, hard. He said the alliance was going to be restructured. He sounded like it was already decided, like it was a done thing, and the smart play was to be on the right side of it. "Told you I was going to align with the Vale family. He told me you were already aligned." "That's Sabrina." He stopped again, looked at his hands. "He told you Sabrina was going to be in this house permanently," Vincent said. Teller said nothing, which was the same as yes. Imani watched Vincent's face. It didn't change. It simply resolved. The way a picture comes into focus when you adjust the lens, becoming more itself, rather than adding anything new. "What did you pass to them?" Vincent said. "The timeline. When the filing happened. What Caruso submitted to the DA. I had access to Hartley's communication log, and he cut himself off. I didn't know about the sister." I didn't know what they were going to do with it. But you knew what they were trying to do, Vincent said. The silence that followed was the most honest thing Teller had produced since entering the room. Yes, he said finally, quietly, with the particular diminishment of a man who has chosen the moment to stop fighting the current. Vincent leaned back in his chair. He looked at Teller for a long time, not with anger, not with the theatrical fury that lesser men would have assembled for this moment, but with something more deliberate. The look of someone adding a final notation to a ledger. You have 24 hours to leave this property, and any property associated with my name, Vincent said. Your severance agreement will be prepared by Caruso's office, and it will include a non-disclosure clause that I expect you to honor permanently. If the Vales contact you again, you will not respond, because if you respond, everything you did in this room today becomes public record in a context that's worse for you than for anyone else. Teller said, Is that all? That's all from me. The DA's office may have different questions. Teller stood. He didn't look at Imani. He walked to the door, and Marcus was already there, and the two of them disappeared down the corridor. Vincent didn't move for a moment. Imani said, He's not the last one. No, Vincent said, he's not. Thomas Vale, her father. She said it not as a question. He's been running this longer than Sabrina has. Sabrina's cruelty was personal, reactive. What her father's been doing is structural. Vincent pressed one hand flat on the desk. He genuinely believed that if the alliance with my family was in enough jeopardy, I'd see Sabrina as a stabilizing choice, as the path of least disruption. He was trying to manufacture necessity, Imani said. Yes, and you being interested in me was an obstacle, Vincent said, that he decided to address by removing you. The word removing sat between them with its full weight. Imani thought about 11 months, about the way Sabrina had escalated slowly, at first, then faster, the pressure building in a way that followed a logic that had nothing to do with jealousy and everything to do with timeline. About the specific knowledge Sabrina always seemed to have about Vincent's movements, his schedule, which Tuesdays were safest for what she was doing. She was reporting to him, Imani said. Everything she was doing he knew. He directed it, Vincent said. Sabrina didn't wake up one morning and decide to burn someone. She was running a campaign with a man behind it who had been in this business longer than either of us has been alive. Imani's chest felt very tight. And the filing, she said. The DA. The filing stands. But now we're talking about a conspiracy charge rather than a single assault. Thomas Vale putting his daughter in the position of personally assaulting a household employee as part of a coercion strategy. Vincent stopped. That's a different case. Caruso needs to know tonight. He reached for his phone, dialed, waited. While the call rang, he looked at Imani across the desk, with the expression of a man who had something to say that wasn't going to wait for a better moment, but was also too precise to rush. Call connected. Caruso. Thomas Vale is involved directly. I need you here in the morning with the full case file. A pause. Tonight if you can. Another pause. I understand. 6 a.m. Imani said, Where is your sister right now? She's at school, in the dorm. Can she stay somewhere else tonight? Somewhere that's not directly associated with her university address. The cold moved through Imani, again the specific cold, of a person understanding that the threat hasn't ended, has in fact widened, has expanded to include geography she thought was safe. She has a friend, Imani said. Off campus. Call her. Tell her to go there tonight, and not to mention it to anyone at the university. Imani was already pulling out her phone. The call to Deja was 4 minutes long, and Imani kept her voice level for all four of them. She said she was being cautious. She said it was a professional situation that had gotten complicated. She said she needed Deja to trust her and be somewhere different tonight without announcing it. Deja said, Are you safe? Imani said yes, which was almost true. I don't like this, Deja said. I know. Pack a bag. Go to Priya's. Text me when you're there. Imani, please, Imani said. Just that word, stripped of everything else. And Deja, who knew her sister, heard what was underneath it and said, Okay, I'm going. Imani hung up. Her hands were steady. She was very proud of that. Vincent watched her without commenting on the call. He waited until she'd put the phone away, and then he said, You should eat something. She almost laughed. It came out wrong. Not quite a laugh. Not quite the other thing. That's what you've got right now? It's 7 o'clock, he said. Neither of us has eaten since this morning, and we're about to spend the next several hours making decisions that require functioning brains. She looked at him for a moment. Fine, she said. They ate in the kitchen, Imani pulling together what was available, not bothering with the formal preparation she'd have done at 7 o'clock on an ordinary evening. Bread from yesterday, leftover roasted vegetables, cheese, fruit. She set it on the counter, and they stood on opposite sides of it and ate without much ceremony, and it was so close to ordinary that it made everything around it feel more surreal by contrast. Vincent said, in the middle of it, my father made the original agreement with Thomas Vale in 2009. Port access, primarily. Vale had connections to the harbor authority that were useful. You're telling me this because you're wondering how deep the legitimate entanglement goes. The answer is deeper than I'd prefer, and untangling it is going to take time and create noise. I want you to understand that going into tomorrow. Imani put down the bread she'd been holding. You're worried I'll think it's not worth it. I'm worried you'll think something's going to fall on you. Will it? He looked at her steadily. Some of it may. The story that ran, that was the start. If Thomas Vale decides to go public with a counter-narrative, you could end up named. Your employment here could be characterized in ways designed to undermine the assault case. Imani was quiet. He could make you the problem, she said. Could try. Would it work? Not against the footage and audio, Vincent said. But it would be unpleasant. It would last several weeks minimum. Your name would be associated with this situation in ways that he stopped, chose different words, that a person who has spent their life building something clean would find disturbing. She understood what he was offering her. The architecture of an exit, carefully laid out. A way to take the evidence, let the legal process run without her name. Attach to it publicly, step back before the machine of it ground through anything she cared about. And if I do that, she said, if I step back, the case doesn't weaken. The footage and audio aren't dependent on your active participation. But, he held her gaze. There's no but. I'm not going to tell you the case needs you or that stepping back is cowardly. It's not. You didn't create this situation. No, she said. Sabrina did. With her father's instruction and the cooperation of at least one person inside your network. She picked the bread back up, took a bite, set it down. And the man who spent 11 months convincing me he saw something in me worth pursuing didn't see his own house clearly enough to prevent any of it. Kitchen went very quiet. Vincent said nothing. I'm not blaming you, she said. I'm saying the situation is bigger than a woman with an iron and a threat about financial aid. And stepping back from it doesn't actually make it smaller. It just makes me smaller. He looked at her. I'm not stepping back, she said. Something in his expression shifted, not relief exactly. Something quieter and more permanent than relief. The look of a man who had been waiting to find out what a person was made of and had just gotten his answer. Okay, he said. Stop saying okay like it's a complete sentence. It is a complete sentence. She almost smiled. Didn't quite. What's the plan for tomorrow? He told her. Caruso arriving at 6, the expanded filing with the DA, incorporating what Teller had disclosed. A parallel strategy through the civil courts for the coercion and intimidation campaign, and this was the part that required him to look at her directly. When he said it, the likelihood that Thomas Vale, when he understood the walls closing, would attempt a last negotiation. He'll try to go around the legal process, Vincent said. He'll try to get to someone who can make this quieter. That might be Caruso. It might be someone in the DA's office. It might be... He paused. It might be me. You think he'll come to you directly. He's built a career on the assumption that business relationships survive personal ones. That no matter what happened between his daughter and an employee of mine, the port access agreements and the harbor connections were too valuable to throw away over principle. He thinks you'll deal. He thinks everyone deals at the right number. Will you? The question was direct. No softener, no cushion. Just the plain form of it, the thing she needed to know about the man she'd just told she wasn't stepping back from. Vincent said, no one word, no elaboration, no speech about principles or legacy or the right thing. Just no, delivered with the flatness of a man who didn't need to perform conviction because the conviction was simply there, structural, load-bearing. Imani breathed. Okay, she said. He almost smiled. Now you're doing it. It's a complete sentence, she said. They cleaned up the counter together without discussing it. She moved things. He moved things. And it was the most domestic either of them had been in each other's presence for 11 months. And neither of them commented on it, because commenting on it would have made it fragile. And neither of them was in a position to handle fragile tonight. At 9:15, Vincent's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His jaw did the thing, the small tightening that she'd learned, meant something unexpected and unwelcome. He answered. Thomas. Imani went still. Vincent looked at her, pressed the speaker, set the phone on the counter between them. Thomas Vale's voice filled the kitchen, older than Sabrina's, rougher under the polished surface, carrying the particular authority of a man who had been in rooms that shaped consequences for a very long time. Vincent. I think it's time we had a conversation without lawyers in the room. We can have it, Vincent said. Say what you want to say. A brief pause. The recalibration of a man who had expected more resistance at the doorstep. I'm going to assume you've had a difficult few days. The situation with Sabrina, he said her name, like it was a business asset that had malfunctioned, got out of hand. She's emotional. She made choices I wouldn't have sanctioned. But you sanctioned others, Vincent said. Another pause. Shorter this time. I'm calling because I believe we can resolve this in a way that serves both our interests. The agreements between our organizations have been profitable for 15 years. What's happened here doesn't have to end that. What's happened here, Vincent said, is that your daughter deliberately burned a member of my household with a hot iron on your instruction as part of a sustained intimidation campaign. And then when it became clear that strategy had failed, someone in my network who had been turned by your family used confidential legal information to threaten a 21-year-old nursing student. Kitchen was completely silent, except for Thomas Vale's breathing on the line. Imani's hand, the burned one, was pressed flat against the counter. She could feel the bandage, the low heat of the healing skin underneath, the specific texture of pain that had become so familiar in the last 2 weeks. It was almost like a companion. Thomas Vale said, the girl's situation at the university was an exploratory measure. Nothing happened to her. The word girl hit Imani like a door slamming. Vincent looked at her. His eyes were asking something. She gave him the smallest nod. You're on speaker, Vincent said. Imani Brooks is in the room. A silence that was different from the others textured. The silence of a man recalculating against a variable he hadn't expected to be present. Miss Brooks, Thomas Vale said finally. Imani said, Mr. Vale, I hope you understand that what happened to you was... Don't, she said. Her voice was quiet and completely level. Don't manage me. I've been managed by your daughter for 11 months, and I'm done with the whole architecture of it. Beat. You're a capable woman, Thomas Vale said. From what I understand, genuinely talented. This situation doesn't have to define your professional. You had someone call my sisters, Imani said, pretending to be from her financial aid office, to find out whether I'd reported what your daughter did to me, so that you could what? Pressure me into staying quiet? Pull her aid if I didn't? I told you, he said, and his voice had something new in it, not warmth, but a kind of rough directness, man to person rather than the management register he'd been using. That measure was exploratory. It wasn't actioned, because we found out first, Imani said. Silence, Mr. Vale, Vincent said. Here's what I need you to hear clearly. The filing with the DA's office now includes teller's disclosure and the call to the university. Caruso is expanding the documentation tonight. When you wake up tomorrow morning, the legal picture will look considerably different from what it looks like right now. This call won't change that, but it's being recorded, so I'd encourage you to think carefully about what you say next. A very long pause. Vincent. Thomas Vale's voice had shed another layer. Older now, underneath the strategy. Tired. My daughter is facing criminal charges. I know. She's 30 years old. I know how old she is. Whatever my failures in judgment, Thomas said, she is my child, and what she's facing is the result of choices she made, Vincent said. And choices you made. That's not something I can adjust for you. The pause this time was the longest. Then Thomas Vale said something Imani hadn't expected. He said, what do you want? Name it. I'll hear it. Vincent looked at Imani. She looked back. He said, I want your complete cooperation with the DA's investigation. I want written documentation of the instruction chain, what you directed Sabrina to do and when, And I want the Vale family's business arrangements with my legitimate companies terminated by mutual agreement so that nobody has to litigate the unwinding. That's everything, Thomas said. Yes. And in exchange? In exchange, Vincent said, I don't spend the next 3 years making it my personal project to ensure that every arrangement you've built on the back of your family name faces the specific kind of scrutiny that tends to collapse them. The silence that followed was the silence of a man's looking at a hand and understanding that folding now was the only version of this game where he walked out with anything at all. I'll need until morning, Thomas said. You have until 6 a.m., Vincent said. Caruso files at 7 regardless. The call ended. Imani stared at the phone on the counter. He'll cooperate, Vincent said. You sound sure. He's a practical man. It's the thing that makes him dangerous and the thing that limits him. He doesn't have ideology, he has interests. I just showed him where his interests actually are. She nodded slowly, looked at the phone, then at her hand, then at the far wall of the kitchen she'd been standing in for 11 months, the kitchen that had been the site of the worst thing that had happened to her in recent memory. That had also been, she could admit this now, the place where the best conversations of the last year had also occurred. What happens tomorrow, she said. Not a question exactly. More like a person placing a marker at the edge of a territory they haven't mapped yet. Tomorrow is going to be loud, Vincent said. Caruso, the DA liaison, probably some version of the Vale family attorney trying to scope the cooperation agreement. It's going to be a long day. And after that? He looked at her directly. That depends on decisions that aren't mine to make. She understood what he meant. She'd told him 2 days ago that she didn't know what to do with her feelings while she was still cashing his checks. He hadn't pushed it then. He wasn't pushing it now. Question was in the room. I'm going to go home tonight, she said. I'll have Marcus. I don't need an escort, she said. I'm going to go home and sleep in my own apartment and call my sister and confirm she's at Priya's and then sleep. And tomorrow I'm going to come in at 6:45 and be here for whatever the day requires. He nodded. And after all of this is over, she said, I'm going to need some time to figure out what I'm doing next. Okay, he said, very quiet. She looked at him. That time I'm not making any decisions about anything personal until I've made a decision about the professional piece, about what I'm doing with my life, the restaurant, the savings, what I'm building. I need that to be clear and separate in mind before... She stopped. Do you understand what I'm saying? He said. You need to know who you are outside this house before you decide what you want inside it. She breathed. Yes, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. I've been waiting 11 months. I can wait longer. She picked up her jacket from the hook by the kitchen door. Get some sleep, she said. You too. She walked out through the service entrance into the cold Manhattan evening and heard the door close behind her, and she stood on the rear step for one breath, just one, with the city's noise around her and the ache in her hand, and the particular exhaustion of a person who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and only just set it down for the night. Then she walked to the street. Her phone buzzed at 8:47. Deja, I'm at Priya's. Her cat is sitting on my head. I want the whole story Sunday. Imani typed back, Sunday. All of it. I love you. She kept walking. She was 3 blocks from her apartment when her phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She'd told Deja not to. Had been operating on heightened alert for 2 days, but something about the specific timing of it made her stop on the sidewalk and pick up. Ms. Brooks. The voice was a woman's. Professional, clipped, slightly rushed in the way of someone calling at the end of a long workday. My name is Patricia Dunn. I'm a senior investigator with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I apologize for the hour. We received documentation today from your attorney of record. I don't have an attorney of record, Imani said. A brief pause. The filing from Caruso and Associates lists you as the primary complainant. Under the provisions of the expanded case filing, our office is required to make contact within 24 hours. I see, Imani said. Standing on the sidewalk, her jacket open, the wind finding the collar of her shirt. We'll need you to come in for a formal statement. Ideally tomorrow. I understand that's short notice. What time? Imani said. Another pause shorter, the pause of a woman, slightly surprised that the answer was that direct. We have an opening at 9 a.m. I'll be there at 8:55, Imani said. She got the address. She hung up. She stood for another moment on the sidewalk, her burned hand in her jacket pocket, the city moving around her, the way cities move indifferent, continuous, massive, alive. She thought about the next morning. The DA's office at 9. Caruso filing at 7. Thomas Vale's deadline at 6. Vincent sitting in that study with the controlled stillness of a man waiting for the world he'd built to demonstrate whether it had the integrity he'd told himself it had. She thought about what it meant to walk into a government office and say, in formal recorded language, what had been done to her. To say it without minimizing it, without wrapping it in the protective ambiguity of something happened or there was an incident. To say I was burned deliberately. I was threatened. I protected myself by staying quiet, and that protection cost me 3 months of my life and a layer of skin off my right hand and more nights of lying awake than I can count. She thought about Deja with Priya's cat on her head, probably doing homework, probably worried, but managing it the way Brooks women manage things by staying in motion. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, the step stool, the peach preserves at the exact right temperature. She thought about a restaurant in Brooklyn that didn't exist yet but would. She started walking again. The night was cold, and she was very tired, and her hand hurt, and she was not, she told herself this clearly. Without sentiment, she was not afraid. She was a woman who had survived something specific and provable, and was about to let it be witnessed officially, on the record, in language that would follow Sabrina Vale and Thomas Vale for the rest of their professional lives. She was a woman who had told the most feared man in the city that she would not make personal decisions from a position of professional dependence, and he had said okay and meant it. She was a woman with a savings account and a plan, and a sister who was safe tonight and a morning at 8:55 that required her to be present, coherent, and completely without apology for any part of what had happened to her. 4 blocks. 3. Her building came into view. She took the stairs rather than the elevator because she needed the movement, needed the slight burn in her thighs, and the sound of her own steps in the stairwell, needed the physical sensation of climbing toward something. She reached her floor. She unlocked her apartment door. She stood in the doorway for 1 moment, looking at the small, clean space she had made for herself in this city, the kitchen she'd fitted out with equipment that mattered, the window with the decent light, the framed photograph of her grandmother on the wall near the door, the woman who had taught her that you showed people what mattered by what you did with your hands. Then she walked in and closed the door and locked it behind her, and she sat at her kitchen table and allowed herself, for exactly as long as she needed to feel everything she'd been too busy surviving to feel. And when she was done, she washed her face, checked that Deja's text was still there, changed the bandage on her hand carefully, methodically, the way her grandmother had taught her to treat anything worth taking care of, and set her alarm for 5:30. 6 hours. 6 hours, and then the last day of the worst chapter of her life would begin, and she would walk into it the same way she'd walked through every hard thing since she was 9 years old on a step stool in Baltimore, with her hands ready and her eyes open, and the absolute bone-deep refusal to become smaller than she was. Across the city, in a study on the upper floor of a fortified Manhattan mansion, Vincent Drake sat at his desk with the case file open in front of him and his phone on the table, showing a text from Caruso confirming the expanded filing was prepared for 7 a.m. He looked at the file for a long time. Then he closed it. He looked at the window, at the dark city beyond it, at the distance between this room and a 3-bedroom apartment in a building 4 miles away, where a woman with a burned right hand had just, he suspected, set an alarm for far too early in the morning. He had told her he could wait. He meant it. What he had not told her what he was only now, in the quiet of a room that still carried faint traces of the scent of last night's dinner, beginning to understand about himself, was that waiting had never been the right word for what he was doing. Waiting implied passivity, the neutral endurance of a man with nothing better to do than hold a position until a door opened. What Vincent Drake was doing was something he had not done in 20 years of building an empire that ran on certainty and control, and the iron management of every variable. He was hoping. Somewhere in Thomas Vale's house on the Upper East Side, a man who had spent 30 years building a world on the assumption that everything had a price was sitting with a 6 a.m. deadline, and the growing, terrible understanding that he had spent 15 years calculating the wrong currency entirely. and in a holding area of the DA's office, in a file that would be reviewed first thing in the morning by an investigator named Patricia Dunn, who did not know yet that the woman she'd spoken to on the phone would arrive 4 minutes before schedule with everything written down in clean, precise order. The case that had begun with a pressing iron on a Tuesday afternoon in a kitchen in Manhattan was beginning to acquire the weight and shape and irreversible momentum of something that was no longer a domestic incident. It was a reckoning, and the woman at the center of it had set her alarm for 5:30 and was for the first time in 3 weeks sleeping without the low-grade vigilance of someone waiting for the next blow, because the next move was hers. And she had already decided exactly what she was going to do with it. Patricia Dunn was already at her desk when Imani arrived at 8:53. The DA's office on the 4th floor of the Center Street building had the particular atmosphere of a place that processed human damage at scale fluorescent lights that were slightly too bright, carpet that had been replaced once and would need replacing again, the faint institutional smell of coffee that had been sitting too long, and documents that had been handled too many times. It was nothing like the places Imani had spent the last 11 months. It had no marble floors or tall windows or the particular quality of silence that only very expensive properties could afford to maintain. It felt for reasons she hadn't anticipated, like relief. Dunn was 50-something, with reading glasses on a chain, and the unhurried manner of a woman who had been doing this long enough to know that urgency and speed were not the same thing. She shook Imani's hand, the left one, because she'd looked at the bandage on the right without commenting on it, and adjusted and gestured to a chair across the desk that was more comfortable than it looked. "Thank you for coming in," Dunn said. "I know 6 a.m. calls aren't anyone's idea of ideal. I would have come in regardless," Imani said. Dunn looked at her over the glasses. "I know. That's actually why I called when I did." She opened the file folder on her desk, Caruso's documentation. Imani could see the letterhead and flattened her hands on either side of it. "Before we begin the formal, I want to give you an overview of where the case stands this morning. Then I want to hear everything from you in your own words. No leading questions. No interpretation. Just what happened and when." "Okay," Imani said. "Thomas Vale's attorney contacted our office at 5:47 this morning," Dunn said. Imani kept her face still. His client is prepared to cooperate fully with the investigation. He's providing written documentations of the instruction chain, what he directed, what he knew, what he sanctioned. His attorney has characterized this as a proactive act of transparency. Dunn said's last phrase, with the particular dryness of a woman who had heard every version of that language and remained unimpressed by all of them. "He made his deadline," Imani said. "He did." Dunn took off her glasses and set them on top of the folder. "That cooperation doesn't reduce Sabrina Vale's exposure. She is the individual who committed the physical assault, and cooperation from a co-conspirator doesn't transfer to the person who held the iron. I want you to understand that." Imani nodded. "It does," Dunny continued, "mean that what you say since in this room today becomes part of a much larger evidentiary picture. Your account isn't just the center of a single assault case anymore. It's a thread in a conspiracy filing that involves coercion, intimidation, suborning of a private employee, and potentially wire fraud in relation to the call made to your sister's university." Imani looked at her. "Fraud. Using a fraudulent professional identity to extract information under false pretenses is a federal question. We're coordinating with an assistant U.S. attorney as of this morning." Dunn put the glasses back on. "Which means, Ms. Brooks, that I need you to understand what you're agreeing to when you agree to give this statement. It will be thorough. It may be used across multiple proceedings. It will very likely become part of a public record that can be accessed." "I know," Imani said. "You've been advised of this by your own legal counsel?" "I don't have my own legal counsel." Dunn stopped. "Caruso filed on your behalf. Caruso represents Vincent Drake," Imani said. "He filed with information I provided, but he doesn't represent me. I haven't retained anyone." Dunn looked at her for a moment, not with surprise exactly, more with the particular attention of a woman reassessing someone she'd already formed an initial picture of. "I'm going to recommend you speak with the victim assistance coordinator in this office. Before we begin the formal statement," Dunn said, "there are services available." "I appreciate that," Imani said. "But I'd like to give the statement now, if that's all right." I can follow up on the other resources afterward. Pause. Why now? Dunn asked. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. Imani said, because I've been waiting to say it out loud to someone who can do something with it, and I don't want to wait anymore. Dunn looked at her for another moment. Then she reached over and pressed the record button on the device at the corner of her desk. Okay, she said. Start at the beginning. Imani started at the beginning. She spoke for 47 minutes without stopping. She did not minimize and she did not dramatize. She did not use the distancing language. She'd spent 11 months perfecting the something happened. And there was an incident, and it's complicated. She used the plain words. She said she burned my hand, and she threatened my sister, and I didn't say anything because I was afraid of what she could do to someone I loved, and I was also ashamed, and I know that shame wasn't mine to carry, but I carried it anyway, and that's the truth. She said that last part and felt Dunn's pen slow slightly without stopping. The way a person's body responds to a sentence that lands differently than the ones before it. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Dunn said, "Is there anything you want to add?" Imani thought about it, really thought about it, ran back through 11 months, looking for the piece she might have smoothed over or left in vague language. Hartley, she said, the house manager. He knew enough to know something was wrong, and he didn't act. I've forgiven him for that, personally, and I don't want this statement used to create problems for someone who apologized, and I believed him. I just want it to be accurate. Dunn wrote something. Noted. And Marcus Reyes. She said it more carefully. He was in a hard position. The two staff members who gave statements, they came forward when asked directly. That matters. It does, Dunn said. I don't want everyone around this to be treated as though they're the same as what Sabrina and her father did. They're not. Dunn looked at her. You understand that the office will make its own determinations about culpability. I understand. I'm telling you what I know from being there. Dunn nodded once. At 10:22, Imani walked out of the Center Street building into morning light that had turned genuinely warm one of those November days that occasionally arrived in New York like an apology for winter. The sky high and clear and almost generous. She stood on the sidewalk. She had thought she would feel. She wasn't sure what she had expected to feel. Lighter, maybe? The Hollywood version of this moment had a particular quality. The music rises. The shoulders drop. Something releases. What she actually felt was tired and very clear, like a room after all the furniture has been moved and you can finally see the actual shape of the floor. Her phone showed 3 messages. The first was from Deja. The cat is still on my head. Call me when you're out of wherever you are. The second was from a number she didn't recognize that turned out, when she read it, to be from a paralegal at a legal aid organization that Dunn had apparently contacted on her behalf, while Imani was in the restroom, between the statement and signing the transcript. The message said they had a victim's advocacy attorney available for a complimentary consultation and asked when she was free. She saved the number. The third was from Vincent. 3 words, how did it go? Not a question mark. He did that sometimes stated things that were questions, as though the question mark would be redundant, as though the interest was already evident enough not to require the punctuation. She typed back, fine. I mean it this time. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then I know. She put the phone in her pocket and walked toward the subway. At the Drake estate, 6 hours of activity had reshaped the landscape of the property in ways that were invisible to anyone looking at the exterior, but seismic to the people inside it. Caruso had filed the expanded documentation at 7:02 a.m. By 8, the Vale family attorney had delivered the cooperation documents. His client had spent the pre-dawn hours preparing 15 pages of detailed accounting, Thomas Vale's signature on everyone, his attorney's initials in the corner of each page with the date and timestamp of a man who had sat up through the night, producing the thing he'd spent 30 years believing he'd never have to produce. Marcus briefed Vincent on the filing confirmation at 7:30. Then he briefed him on the departure of 2 more members of staff, not dismissed, resigning, which Marcus noted with the particular expressiveness of a man who understood that the distinction mattered, and also that it didn't, really, in the end. Property felt different by mid-morning. Not empty. Quieter in the way a room feels quieter when the source of a low-frequency hum you'd stopped consciously hearing is finally switched off. Vincent spent the morning in meetings. He could not reschedule 3 separate calls related to the legitimate business interests that Caruso's filing had flagged for protective review. The careful work of a man ensuring that the legal turbulence surrounding the Vale situation created the minimum necessary damage to structures he'd spent years building cleanly. He did this work with the full attention it required, and he did not think about the text exchange on his phone, or the woman who had walked into a government building alone at 8:55, because thinking about it was not useful, and he had learned long ago to keep his useful attention and his personal attention in separate rooms inside himself. He did it successfully until about 10:30, at which point he gave up and thought about it anyway. She had said fine, and said she meant it. He believed her. She used language, precisely one of the things about her he had noticed earliest and found most trustworthy. When she said fine and didn't mean it, there was a particular quality to the word, a slight over-smoothness, like a surface that has been sanded too carefully. When she meant it, it just sat there, simple, nothing extra. Today it sat there. He made the last call of the morning, confirmed 2 things with Caruso, and told Hartley he'd eat lunch in the kitchen. Hartley, to his credit, simply said, "Of course." Imani came back to the property at noon. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. She'd taken the subway to the Upper East Side, walked the 4 blocks from the station, and let herself in through the service entrance, the way she always had, and tied her apron over her street clothes because she hadn't changed, and started lunch. She needed to cook something. That was the most honest way she could explain it, even to herself. The morning had required a kind of stillness, the controlled, precise stillness of giving testimony, of choosing each word for its accuracy rather than its comfort, and that stillness had used something up that cooking replenished. It was the difference between language and something older than language. Her hands moving over a prep surface, the particular rightness of a knife, finding the line through a vegetable, the way heat worked on raw things and made them into something you could give someone. This was how she processed. This was what she had, and she had learned not to be embarrassed about needing it. She made soup. A proper one, not the gesture-at-warmth kind, but a real slow-built stock from the bones she found in the back of the refrigerator. Aromatics, the careful skimming of a pot that needed 40 minutes of quiet attention. She made bread alongside it, the quick kind, a skillet cornbread, that filled the kitchen with a smell her grandmother would have recognized instantly. She was halfway through the stock when she heard him. Not footsteps. Just the particular shift in the kitchen's atmosphere when someone entered it who occupied space differently than other people. She'd been aware of this quality of his presence for 11 months, without ever letting herself name it as such, and she named it now. Internally, without fanfare, he entered rooms like he meant to be in them. "You didn't say you were coming back," he said. "I needed to cook something." Pause. Then the sound of the stool pulling out from under the island. "What are you making?" "Soup. Cornbread." She kept her back to him, skimming. "Hartley said you were eating lunch in here." "I am." "Then sit down and let me finish." He sat. They were quiet for several minutes. The stock needed attention, and she gave it, and the kitchen had the dense, warm smell of something being built slowly from its most basic elements, and neither of them manufactured conversation to fill the space. "How did Caruso's filing land?" she asked finally. "Well, the DAs expanded their scope, which Caruso expected. It's going to be a longer process than a single assault case. Months, probably." "I know, Dunn told me. How was she?" Imani thought about it. "Competent. Direct. She didn't perform sympathy at me, which I appreciated." "Good." He paused. "Sabrina will have her own legal team managing the cooperation agreement her father signed. There'll be some attempt to use his cooperation to soften her exposure. Caruso is prepared for it. Will it work?" The softening. "Some. Not enough to matter for the record." He was quiet a moment. "She's going to be convicted of something. It may be reduced from the original charge, but there's footage and audio, and a documented injury, and her father's written account of his own instructions. The shape of it is set." Imani nodded. She wasn't sure what she felt about that. She'd expected to feel more, had been braced for some complex emotional accounting when the legal certainty arrived. What she actually felt was something closer to a door closing quietly. Final but not violent. "Her father," she said. "His cooperation agreement includes a civil settlement to you. Caruso's structuring it. It'll be significant. She stopped skimming. I didn't ask for that, she said. I know. It was a condition of the cooperation rather than a negotiated demand. Caruso built it in because the alternative for Thomas was a civil suit running alongside the criminal proceedings, and the numbers on that were considerably worse. How significant, she said. He told her. She put the skimming spoon down on the rest next to the stove. She looked at the stock for a moment, at the clear golden surface of it, at what 40 minutes of careful attention had built from bones and water and aromatics. That number was the restaurant. That number was more than the restaurant. That number was the restaurant, an operating capital, and the specific margin between doing it correctly and doing it desperately, between a business that lasted and one that lasted 18 months and then closed, because the math was always just slightly wrong. She picked the spoon back up. Tell Caruso I want it in a structure that's entirely separate from any Drake holdings, she said. No shared accounts. No appearance of. Already specified, Vincent said. He assumed. She looked over her shoulder at him. He was watching her with the expression she had. Across 11 months, collected and examined in private, and then put carefully away, the one that wasn't calculated, wasn't managed, wasn't the controlled face of a powerful man deciding how much to show. The one that was simply him, looking at her in the way that she'd first registered as unsettling and had gradually, entirely against her better judgment, come to think of as the most honest thing she'd encountered in a very long time. Stop looking at me like that, she said. Like what? Like you already know what I'm going to decide. I don't know what you're going to decide, he said. I'm looking at you like someone who doesn't have to guess anymore, but still has to wait. Those are different things. She turned back to the stock. Lunch was served at the island counter soup bowls, cornbread cut into wedges on a plate between them, neither of them mentioning that this was not how lunch was typically served in this house, neither of them particularly interested in the typical. Hartley appeared briefly in the doorway. Assessed the situation, said, The calls for 3 o'clock have been confirmed, Mr. Drake, and withdrew without requiring any acknowledgement, which was perhaps the most graceful thing Thomas Hartley had ever done. They ate in the easy silence of two people who had survived something together and were, for the first time in the long history of the thing they'd survived, on the other side of the worst of it. My grandmother made cornbread in a cast-iron skillet, Imani said. Same basic recipe my whole life. She made it for company, and she made it when somebody died, and she made it when there was nothing else to make, and the whole apartment smelled like it, either way. What was her name? Ruth. She looked at the piece of cornbread in her hand. She died. I've been cooking her when I was 19. I've been cooking her recipes ever since, and there are days when something almost comes out right, and days when it doesn't, and I can't always tell you the difference in what I did. I think the difference is in what I'm carrying that day. Vincent looked at her today. Today it's right, she said. He tried it. She watched him, the way she always watched people eat what she'd made, not performatively, not fishing for the reaction, but with the direct attention of a craftsperson monitoring whether the thing worked. Yes, he said. It is. She picked up her spoon. The afternoon was quieter than the morning had been. Imani finished her shift, the actual work of it, dinner prep, the systematic organization of a professional kitchen at midweek, and she did it with the quiet focus she'd brought to this kitchen for 11 months, except that the particular low-grade tension that had lived underneath the focus for so long was gone. It had been there so constantly she'd stopped feeling it as distinct from herself. Its absence had a texture, like the absence of a sound you hadn't known, was continuous until it stopped. At 4:15, she received a call from the legal aid paralegal. She took it in the service corridor, one hand braced against the wall, listening to the outline of services available to her, the name of the attorney assigned to her consultation, the appointment time offered for the following week. She said yes to the appointment. She said it not because she needed saving the settlement structure Caruso had built would hold, and the criminal case was not hers to manage, but because she understood, in the plain practical way she understood most things, that having her own representation in the aftermath of this was different from having Caruso manage her interests as a secondary priority, inside Vincent Drake's primary case. She was a party in this matter. She had her own interests. They were worth representing. At 5:30, she untied her apron for the last time that day and hung it on the hook by the service entrance. She picked up her bag. Vincent was in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come down. He moved quietly for a man of his size, always had. "I want to give you something," he said. "Before you leave. Not a gift. It's not that kind of thing." She looked at him. He held out an envelope. Plain, white, her name written on the front in his handwriting, which she'd seen once before on a note accompanying a jar of peach preserves from a farmer's market. She took it. Inside was a document, 2 pages, Caruso's letterhead. She read it slowly, the way she read anything that mattered. It was a formal separation of her employment agreement from the Drake estate, structured as a mutual and amicable conclusion, with a reference letter that Caruso had drafted, and Vincent had apparently signed that morning while she was at the DA's office. The letter was 2 paragraphs. It described her work in specific, concrete language, not effusive, not the overwritten praise of an employer, managing a delicate situation, but accurate. What she'd cooked, the quality of it, the professionalism of her conduct. The second paragraph was 3 sentences. It described her as someone whose integrity under pressure reflected a character that any future employer or business partner would be fortunate to encounter. It said her departure from the estate was at the natural conclusion of a placement that had served its original purpose. It said she was recommended without reservation. She read it twice. "You're ending my employment," she said. "I'm returning your freedom of movement," he said. "You said you needed the professional piece to be clear before anything else could be. This is the professional piece. You're not the Drake estate chef anymore. You're a private chef with a documented record and a settlement and a plan." She looked at the letter. "The checks stop," she said. "The checks stop. And if I walk out of here tonight and open a restaurant and it does well, and I never call you, then I'll read the reviews," he said. She looked up at him. He was standing in the doorway with his hands at his sides, and no calculation in his face whatsoever, which was the most vulnerable she had ever seen him. And she thought, with the particular clarity of a woman who had just spent 11 months learning to trust the evidence of what she actually observed, rather than what she feared or hoped that this was. What he looked like when he wasn't managing anything. Unguarded, tired slightly, real. "I'm going to need 6 months minimum," she said. "I know. To find a space. Negotiate a lease. Handle the build-out. Source suppliers. Hire staff. Actually open the thing. I know. During which time I'm going to be completely consumed by it, and I'm not going to have bandwidth for anything complicated. I understand complicated bandwidth," he said. "I'll manage." She looked at him for a long moment. "You should know," she said, "that I'm not going to be easy about this. I don't become a different person because something hard ended. I'm still going to tell you when you're wrong. I'm still going to need things to be mine in ways you might find inconvenient. I've been watching you be exactly that person for 11 months, he said. "It's the reason we're having this conversation." She put the letter back in the envelope. She put the envelope in her bag. She looked at him one more time, the careful look, the full one, the kind she'd been rationing for 11 months, because she didn't trust herself with the uncensored version, and said, 6 months, and then dinner, at my restaurant, my table, my food. Something in his face shifted, barely. The near smile she'd cataloged somewhere in the private accounting she'd been keeping since October of the previous year. "I'll be there," he said. "Don't be late," she said. She walked past him, through the service entrance, out into the November evening where the warmth of earlier had settled into cool, but not yet cold. That particular hour before Manhattan decided it was winter and committed. She walked to the subway. She thought about a restaurant in Brooklyn, about a space with good light and a kitchen she'd design herself, starting from the equipment she actually needed, rather than what a previous tenant had left behind. About a menu that was her grandmother's cooking and her training and her own particular's obsession. With the moment a thing came out right, translated into something a stranger could sit down in front of and understand without being told why it mattered. She thought about Deja graduating in 4 months, about sitting in those seats watching her sister walk across the stage in a cap and gown, and the specific quality of that pride, the kind that was also exhaustion and relief, and the cost of every dollar you'd chosen not to spend on yourself, so that the path could stay clear for someone else. She thought about a man standing in a doorway, with his hands at his sides, and nothing hidden on his face. She didn't call Deja until she was on the subway, and then she called her for an hour the whole story. Everything she'd kept compressed into handling it, and I'll explain Sunday, and just go to Priya's, uncompressed now, laid out in full. Daja was quiet through most of it, and then not quiet at all, and then quiet again in the way she went quiet when she was trying not to cry and failing. Mani, Deja said, you should have told me. I know. You always do this. You carry everything by yourself, and then you act surprised when it gets heavy. I know, Imani said again. Promise me, Deja. Promise me you'll call me before it gets that bad again. Not after. Before. Imani pressed her thumb against the space between her eyes. I promise. Okay. A breath. Okay. And the rest months. Going to happen. When? 6 months, maybe 8. I'm going to come eat there 3 times a week. You live in Maryland. I'll transfer, Deja said, and she laughed, and Imani laughed. And it was the laugh of 2 women who had grown up in the same small kitchen, on a step stool learning what mattered, and who had spent their adult lives carrying that knowledge through terrain. It was not always easy to carry things through. I love you, Imani said. I love you too. And Mani? Yeah. The man, the one who did all that. Imani said nothing. Just Deja said, and Imani could hear the smile in it. The 21-year-old version of wisdom that was sometimes more accurate than the 34-year-old version. Don't be stupid about it, okay? Being independent and being alone aren't the same thing. Good night, Deja, Imani said. Good night. The weeks that followed had their own texture, dense and practical and full of the specific work of dismantling one version of a life and beginning to construct another. Imani sublet her apartment for a larger one in Brooklyn because she needed a kitchen she could actually test recipes in, and the new place had a gas range and a window that faced east and let in morning light in a way that made the kitchen the best room in a 3-room apartment, which was the correct ratio. She had her consultation with the legal aid attorney, a woman named Grace Owusu, who had been doing victim advocacy for 14 years, and who looked at the settlement structure Caruso had built and spent 3 minutes reviewing it before saying, "He did right by you on this. There are a few provisions I'd want to add. The rest holds." She added the provisions. The rest held. She found the restaurant space in February. It was not perfect. It was a shuttered corner spot in Prospect Heights that had previously been a casual Italian place, and before that a laundromat, and it had good bones but a kitchen that needed complete rebuilding, and a dining room that was smaller than she'd originally imagined. She stood in the middle of the empty dining room on the February afternoon. She first saw it, with the contractor walking her through the structural considerations and the timeline and the numbers, and she looked at the light coming through the front windows, the same east-facing quality as her apartment kitchen, and said, "This is it." Contractor looked at her. "You sure?" "The kitchen build-out alone is—" "I know the numbers," she said. "This is it." The build-out took 11 weeks. She was there, most days, not because she needed to supervise every detail, but because she needed to watch it become itself, needed to see the kitchen go from gutted shell to something that matched the picture she'd been building. In her head since Baltimore, since a step stool, since the specific dream of a place that was entirely hers. She named it Ruth's. Not in the signage just said the address in clean type, nothing precious about it. Ruth was in the menu, in the language she used for the food, in the way the cooking tasted. You didn't need the name on the door if it was in everything that came out of the kitchen. She hired 4 people, a sous chef she'd worked with 3 jobs ago, who texted back within 4 hours of her reaching out, a front-of-house manager who had 20 years of restaurant experience, and the particular quality of never making a guest feel managed, and 2 kitchen staff who were young and serious and willing to learn things the specific way she needed them learned. She opened on a Tuesday in May. She chose Tuesday deliberately. She had thought about it for a while, whether the day would carry weight, whether it would feel wrong, and then decided that the way you took a day back from the worst thing that had happened in it was to fill it with something that was entirely yours. So Tuesday it was. The first 2 weeks were what opening weeks were: chaotic, exhausting. The distance between what you planned and what actually happened, measured in real time by your body's reserves. She slept 4 hours some nights and 7 on good ones, and spent the in-between hours lying awake, running ingredient orders and staff schedules and the noise complaint from the building next door that turned out to be about the ventilation fan and not the kitchen volume. The food was right, though. Every night, from the first one. Not because everything was perfect. There were mishaps, plating inconsistencies, a sauce that broke twice in the first week before she identified the temperature variable that was causing it. But the food was right, in the way. Her grandmother's cornbread was right. It tastes like something made by someone who understood what it was for. By the third week, there was a wait for weekend reservations. By the fifth week, a food writer from a mid-sized outlet sat in the corner booth for 3 hours and ordered 8 things and left a note with the server that said she'd be in touch. The piece ran the following Tuesday, which continued the pattern. Deja came up from Maryland on a Friday in the restaurant's 6th week. She sat at the bar during the early service and watched the kitchen through the pass-through window and ate 4 courses and did not once offer an unqualified opinion, which was the highest form of respect she was capable of expressing. At the end of the night, after the last table had gone, Deja sat on the counter in Imani's kitchen, the way she had sat on counters their whole lives, and said, "It's you. The food is completely you. You could walk out of there and never come back, and I could still taste exactly who made it." Imani was washing down the prep surfaces. She kept her hands moving. "That's what I was going for," she said. "Did you call him yet?" Deja asked. "Calling him this week. You've been saying that for 2 weeks. I know. The restaurant is open. You're established. Your legal stuff is done. What are you waiting for?" Imani set down the cloth. She looked at her right hand, the one Sabrina had burned, which had healed to a small area of slightly different textured skin on the back of it, not hidden, just present, the way healed things are present. She'd stopped thinking about it most days. Occasionally something the angle of light or a specific temperature would make her aware of it again, briefly, and then it would pass. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe I'm waiting to make sure I'm calling him because I want to, not because it feels like the next step on a list." Deja looked at her. "Do you want to?" Imani looked at the kitchen, at the range she'd specified, and the prep surfaces she'd designed, and the space she'd built from Ruth's recipes, and her own hands, and a settlement that nobody had given her easily. "Yes," she said, "I want to." "Then call him," Deja said. She called him on a Wednesday morning, from her apartment, before she went into the restaurant. He picked up on the second ring. "I heard the review was good," he said. "It was accurate," she said. A pause. The familiar quality of his silence is not empty, just holding. "I wanted to invite you to dinner," she said, "at the restaurant. Saturdays, 8 o'clock. "I'll be there," he said. "I said don't be late, I remember." She put the phone down and sat with her coffee in the kitchen that faced east and let the morning come in the way it did, slowly, without fanfare, the particular quality of light that she had chosen this apartment for. She felt, sitting there, something she didn't immediately have a word for, and then did, steadiness, not happiness, not the brittle brightness of relief, just the steadiness of a person who knows exactly where they are and chose to be there. On Saturday, Vincent arrived at 7:58. He came without bodyguards, the way she'd assumed he would. He wore a jacket she hadn't seen before, dark, well-made without announcing itself, and he stood in the entrance of Ruth's, looking at the room, the warm light, the small tables, the sound of service, moving in the kitchen, with the particular quality of attention he brought to everything he found worth looking at. The front-of-house manager, whose name was Leon, and who did not impress easily, took one look at the man standing in the entrance and moved toward him with the kind of deference that was entirely Leon's own read on the situation and not something Imani had briefed him on. "Mr. Drake," Leon said, "we have you at the corner." Vincent sat in the corner booth, the one with the sight line to the kitchen pass-through, and he did not look at the menu immediately. He looked at the kitchen, at the movement behind the pass, the organized purposefulness of it, the way the staff moved around, Imani not deferentially, not nervously, but with the particular ease of people who trusted the gravity of the person at the center. She sent food out in courses. She'd planned the menu for the table herself, picking things that were honest representations of what the kitchen was, her grandmother's recipes translated through her own training, the specific quality of Southern cooking that carries its history without apology. She sent the cornbread first, the same cast iron skillet version she'd made in his kitchen on the afternoon, that something had shifted between them. The server brought it to the table. Vincent looked at it. He broke off a piece and ate it. He put his hand flat on the table and breathed once, slowly, the controlled exhale of a man choosing not to show everything he felt, a piece of cornbread that tasted like a specific afternoon in November when two people were sitting on opposite sides of a kitchen counter, and both of them knew something had already changed. After the last course, when the restaurant had quieted and most tables had turned for the night, Imani came out of the kitchen. She sat across from him. He looked at her, the way he'd been looking at her since the first morning she'd made shakshuka, and told him it was on the approved menu plan directly, without inventory, without the particular weighted assessment that most men brought to looking at her. Just the look that was only ever about what it appeared to be about. "Well," she said. "The lamb," he said. "How did you get the temperature right on the inside without losing the crust?" "Rest time and a very accurate thermometer," she said. "The sauce on the greens pot liquor reduction. My grandmother's." He nodded, looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. "It's extraordinary, Imani." She heard it in the same register. She heard everything real directly, without the translation layer of suspicion. "Thank you. I don't mean the food. I mean," he gestured, not expansively, just once, toward the room, the kitchen, the space she had built. "This, what you did here." She looked at the restaurant, at Ruth's, at the thing that was entirely hers, built from her own hands and her grandmother's teaching, and a clarity she'd arrived at through the longest hard year of her life. "I know what you mean," she said. They sat in the quiet of the empty restaurant, while the kitchen finished its close, the sounds of it familiar and reassuring, the particular end-of-night language of a kitchen, doing what kitchens do when the work is done. "I meant what I said," Imani said finally. "About this needing to be separate. About me needing it to be mine." "I know you did," he said. "That doesn't change now that the restaurant is open. If anything, it matters more. Because now it's real, and not just a plan, and the difference between it being mine and being adjacent to something of yours is a line I need to maintain. I understand that line," he said. "I need you to actually understand it. Not agree with it because you think I need to hear agreement." He looked at her steadily. "I spent 6 months not calling you, not showing up, not sending things through Caruso to check on the build-out or make sure the funding was landing right. I stayed on my side of the line because you drew it and it was yours to draw. That's not management. That's respect." She held his gaze. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They sat for another few minutes, and then she poured 2 small glasses of the bourbon she kept behind the bar for specific occasions, and they finished the evening the way it had been built, toward not dramatically, not with declarations that required the architecture of a grand gesture, but with 2 adults sitting in a restaurant that smelled like cast iron and good stock and the particular warmth of a kitchen that had been used well. Sabrina Vale pleaded guilty in July to 2nd-degree assault and 1 count of criminal coercion. She received a suspended sentence with mandatory community service and a civil judgment that succeeded anything her lawyers had been able to argue down. She left New York within a month of sentencing and did not return to the circles she'd once moved through. Her name disappeared from the social pages that had once carried it regularly, which was a different kind of disappearance than the one she'd planned, but final in the same way. Thomas Vale's cooperation agreement held. He avoided criminal prosecution in exchange for his testimony and the civil settlement, and the Vale family's business relationships with the Drake Holdings were unwound over the following 8 months in a process that was expensive and exhausting, and resulted in a structure that was, as Caruso told Vincent, considerably cleaner on the other side of it. Marcus Reyes kept his position. He had disclosed, when Vincent asked him directly in the aftermath, that he had noticed the pattern of Sabrina's Tuesday visits earlier than he'd initially admitted and had said nothing, and the admission cost him something not his job, but the particular regard that his job depended on, which had to be rebuilt over time through the slower work of demonstrated trustworthiness. He did that work. It counted for something. Hartley retired in the autumn, quietly, with a letter that Imani heard about secondhand, and never read but was told was considerably more honest about his failures than anyone expected. Deja Brooks graduated in December nursing degree, honors, the whole walk across the stage in the cap and gown. Imani sat in the 3rd row and pressed her right hand the healed one, the slightly different textured patch of skin that was just part of her now, flat on her knee, and watched her sister become a nurse and did not try to make her face do anything except what it naturally did, which was the particular expression of a woman who has kept a promise. Vincent Drake sat 2 seats down from her at the graduation because Deja had insisted on inviting him, and Imani had said she wasn't going to argue about Deja's choices regarding her own graduation, and the 3 of them had lunch afterward at a restaurant that was not Ruth's. It's because Imani had a strict policy about not eating at her own restaurant when she wasn't working, and Vincent ate what was put in front of him without comment, and listened to Deja talk about her first clinical rotation, and asked her one question, a real one, about a specific procedure she'd mentioned that resulted in a procedure she'd mentioned, minute conversation that Imani mostly listened to from across the table, with the particular feeling of watching 2 people she cared about find their own footing with each other. On the rooftop of Ruth's, a year after the restaurant opened, Imani stood in the early evening of a May that had been warm from the beginning of the month. The restaurant was doing well. Not famous, not reviewed in the places that made reservations impossible, but doing well in the real sense, the repeat customers. The neighborhood tables that came in twice a month, the Tuesday nights that were always full in a way that still made her smile privately, the food writing that had built into a small and accurate reputation for a place that was worth the trip to Brooklyn. She was looking out at Manhattan across the water when she heard him come through the rooftop door. She hadn't told him she was up here. He'd arrived for dinner, a regular Saturday, and Leon had apparently told him where she was, and he'd apparently decided that was information he was going to act on. His footsteps stopped behind her. She could feel the distance between them, 3 feet, maybe less. She'd become accurate about the distances. "You should be inside," he said. "It's your Saturday service. My sous chef has it. He's ready." A pause. She heard him move not toward her, just the shift of a person settling into a position of staying for a while. "You know I own a piece of the building next door," he said. She turned around. "What?" "I acquired it in February. It was a business decision. The block has value." "It wasn't," he stopped. "I'm telling you because you'd find out, and I'd rather you find out from me." She looked at him. "You own the building next door to my restaurant," she said. "Yes, since February." "Yes, you didn't mention this." "No." He held her gaze. "Because I knew how it would sound, and I needed you to believe that the restaurant being yours wasn't something I was managing around the edges of. I needed to be able to show you that, not just say it." She was quiet for a moment. "And now you're telling me?" "Because I said I would. Anything that touched your professional world, I'd tell you. Even the things that look bad before you understand them." She looked at him for a long time. "What are you going to do with it?" she said. "The building. Whatever makes the most financial sense for the block," he said. "It has nothing to do with the restaurant. Your lease is your lease. Your landlord is not me." She kept looking at him, reading the surface of it, looking for the management under the honesty, the calculation behind the disclosure, because she had learned, in a year of knowing Vincent Drake outside the structures of employment and crisis, that his honesty was real, but it was also strategic, and the place where those 2 things overlapped was complicated. She didn't find it. She found a man who had bought a building because it was good business and told her about it because she deserved to know, and was standing on a rooftop in May, waiting to find out if the trust he'd spent a year building could hold the weight of a piece of real estate he'd had no bad intention toward. She said, "I'm glad you told me." He breathed. "So am I," he said. The city was pink and gold at the edge where the sun was going down, and the air had the particular quality of a warm May evening in New York that made you understand why people stayed in a city that was expensive and crowded and loud, because there were hours in it that were worth everything they cost. He reached into his jacket. She saw the box before he'd fully brought it out, and she recognized it for what it was without performance, without the particular shock of a woman who hasn't been paying attention, because she had been paying attention for 14 months now, and the only thing that had genuinely surprised her about Vincent Drake was how long it had taken her to stop being surprised by him. He held it out. He didn't open it for her. He held the closed box between them and said, "You can tell me if the timing is wrong." She looked at the box. She thought about 11 months of a kitchen and everything it had held, about a woman who had held an iron against her skin because she believed that was the way to establish where Imani belonged, about a step stool in Baltimore and a grandmother named Ruth who had showed her what love looked like when it didn't have words, about a restaurant that smelled like cast iron and was doing well in the real sense, about a sister in nursing scrubs who had said being independent and being alone weren't the same thing. She thought about a man who had bought a building next door and told her about it because she deserved to know. She reached out. She took the box. She opened it herself. The ring was simple, not small, but not performing its own expense. The kind of thing chosen by someone who had watched her for a year and understood that she didn't want to be adorned. She wanted to be known. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at her right hand, the healed one, the one with the small area of different textured skin that was just part of her now, that had once been the site of someone else's worst idea about where Imani Brooks belonged. Put the ring on that hand, deliberately, without making a speech about it. Just the plain action of a woman choosing the finger she chose and the meaning she assigned to it, which was not victory, not defiance, not the closure of a wound. Just, this is my hand. It belongs to me, and I'm choosing what goes on it. She looked up at him. He was very still. The way he went still when something mattered too much for motion. You're late, she said. His face did the thing, the almost smile, the one she'd been cataloging for 14 months, the one that was only ever real. I've been waiting a year, he said. I know, she said. So have I. The city kept going below them, indifferent and massive and alive, the way cities do, without acknowledgement, without ceremony, entirely unimpressed by the specific gravity of two people standing on a rooftop in May, choosing each other in the plain language of people who have already survived the hard part and know what they're doing. Imani Brooks had spent a year building something that was entirely hers. She had built it from the ground up, with her own hands, from the specific knowledge her grandmother had given her, on a step stool in Baltimore, and it stood in Brooklyn, and smelled like cast iron, and was doing well, in the real sense, and it would keep doing well because it was built on what she actually knew, rather than what she was performing. She was not a woman who had been rescued. She was not a woman who had been chosen from above, by someone powerful enough to override the opinion of the world. She was a woman who had walked into a government office alone at 8:53 and told the truth clearly, and who had rebuilt her professional life from her own savings, and a settlement she'd earned the hard way, and who had opened a restaurant she named after her grandmother, and stood in it every Tuesday and felt the particular rightness of a day reclaimed. And she was a woman who had, with full knowledge and clear eyes, and no remaining debt or dependence or obligation clouding the view, looked at the person across from her on a rooftop in May and decided freely, on her own terms, from the position of someone who had already proven to herself that she didn't need to, that she wanted this. Anywhere she chose to stand was her place. She had always known that, now everyone else did too.